Section 1 of the Vision of Sir Launfal and Other Poems. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Phil Schempf. The Vision of Sir Launfal and Other Poems by James Russell Lowell. A Sketch of the Life of James Russell Lowell. 1. Elmwood. About half a mile from the Craigie House in Cambridge, Massachusetts, on the road leading to the old town of Watertown, is Elmwood, a spacious square house set amongst lilac and syringa bushes, and overtopped by elms. Pleasant fields are on either side, and from the windows one may look out on the Charles River winding its way among the marshes. The house itself is one of a group which, before the War for Independence, belonged to Boston merchants and officers of the Crown who refused to take the side of the Revolutionary Party. Tory Row was the name given to the broad winding road on which the houses stood. Great farms and gardens were attached to them, and some sign of their roomy ease still remains. The estates fell into the hands of various persons after the war, and in the process of time Longfellow came to occupy Craigie House. Elmwood at the time was the property of the Reverend Charles Lowell, minister of the West Church in Boston, and when Longfellow thus became his neighbor, James Russell Lowell was a junior in Harvard College. He was born at Elmwood, February 22, 1819. Anyone who will read An Indian-Summer Reverie will discover how affectionately Lowell dwelt on the scenes of nature and life amidst which he grew up. Indeed, it would be a pleasant task to draw from the full storehouse of his poetry the golden phrases with which he characterizes the trees, meadows, brooks, flowers, birds, and human companions that were so near to him in his youth, and so vivid in his recollection. In his prose works also, a lively paper, Cambridge 30 years ago, contains many reminiscences of his early life. To know any one well, it is needful to inquire into his ancestry, and 2 or 3 hints may be given of the currents that met in this poet. On his father's side, he came from a succession of New England men, who for the previous 3 generations had been in professional life. The Lowells trace their descent from Percival Lowell, a name which survives in the family, of Bristol, England, who settled in Newbury, Massachusetts, in 1639. The great-grandfather was a minister in Newburyport, one of those, as Dr. Hale says, who preached sermons when young men went out to fight the French, and preached sermons again in memory of their death when they had been slain in battle. The grandfather was John Lowell, a member of the Constitutional Convention of Massachusetts in 1780. It was he who introduced into the Bill of Rights a phrase from the Bill of Rights of Virginia, "All men are created free and equal," with the purpose which it effected of setting free every man then held as a slave in Massachusetts. A son of John Lowell and brother of the Reverend Charles Lowell was Francis Cabot Lowell, who gave a great impetus to New England manufactures, and from whom the city of Lowell took its name. Another son, and thus also an uncle of the poet, was John Lowell, Jr., whose wise and far-sighted provision gave to Boston that powerful center of intellectual influence, the Lowell Institute. Of the Reverend Charles Lowell, his son said, in a letter written in 1844, "He is Dr. Primrose in the comparative degree, the very simplest and charmingest of sexagenarians, and not without a great deal of the truest magnanimity." It was characteristic of Lowell thus to go to the vicar of Wakefield for a portrait of his father. Dr. Lowell lived till 1861, when his son was 42. Mrs. Harriet Spence Lowell, the poet's mother, was of Scotch origin, a native of Portsmouth, New Hampshire. She is described as having a great memory, an extraordinary aptitude for language, and a passionate fondness for ancient songs and ballads. It pleased her to fancy herself descended from the hero of one of the most famous ballads, Sir Patrick Spens, and at any rate she made a genuine link in the poetic succession. In a letter to his mother, written in 1837, Lowell says, "I am engaged in several poetical effusions, one of which I have dedicated to you, who have always been the patron and encourager of my youthful muse. The Russell in his name seems to intimate a strain of Jewish ancestry. At any rate, Lowell took pride in the name on this account, for he was not slow to recognize the intellectual power of the Hebrew race. He was the youngest of a family of 5, 2 daughters and 3 sons. An older brother who outlived him a short time was the Reverend Robert Traill Spence Lowell, who wrote besides a novel, The New Priest in Conception Bay, which contains a delightful study of a Yankee, some poems, and a story of schoolboy life. Not long before his death, Lowell wrote to an English friend a description of Elmwood, and as he was very fond of the house in which he lived and died, it is agreeable to read words which strove to set it before the eyes of one who had never seen it. "'Tis a pleasant old house, just about twice as old as I am, 4 miles from Boston, in what was once the country, and is now a populous suburb, but it still has some 10 acres of open about it, and some fine old trees. When the worst comes to the worst, if I live so long, I shall still have 4½ acres left with the house, the rest belonging to my brothers and sisters or their heirs. It is a square house, with 4 rooms on a floor, like some houses of the Georgian era I have seen in English provincial towns, only they are of brick, and this is of wood. But it is solid with its heavy oaken beams, the spaces between which in the 4 outer walls are filled in with brick, though you mustn't fancy a brick and timber house, for outwardly it is sheathed with wood. Inside there is much wainscot of deal, painted white, in the fashion of the time when it was built. It is very sunny, the sun rising so as to shine, at an acute angle to be sure, through the northern windows, and going round the other 3 sides in the course of the day. There is a pretty staircase with the quaint old twisted banisters, which they call balusters now, but mine are banisters. My library occupies 2 rooms, opening into each other by arches at the sides of the ample chimneys. The trees I look out on are the earliest things I remember. There you have me, in my new old quarters, but you must not fancy a large house. Rooms 16 feet square, and on the ground floor 9 high. It was large as things went here when it was built, and has a certain air of amplitude about it, as from some inward sense of dignity. In an earlier letter he wrote, "Here am I in my garret. I slept here when I was a little curly-headed boy, and used to see visions between me and the ceiling, and dream the so often recurring dream of having the earth put into my hand like an orange. In it I used to be shut up without a lamp, my mother saying that none of her children should be afraid of the dark, to hide my head under the pillow and then not be able to shut out the shapeless monsters that thronged around me, minted in my brain. In winter my view is a wide one, taking in a part of Boston. I can see one long curve of the Charles, and the wide fields between me and Cambridge, and the flat marshes beyond the river, smooth and silent with glittering snow. As the spring advances, and one after another of our trees puts forth, the landscape is cut off from me piece by piece, till by the end of May I am closeted in a cool and rustling privacy of leaves." In 2 of his papers especially, My Garden Acquaintance and A Good Word for Winter, has Lowell given glimpses of the outdoor life in the midst of which he grew up. 2. Education. His acquaintance with books and his schooling began early. He learned his letters at a dame school. Mr. William Wells, an Englishman, opened a classical school in one of the spacious Tory Row houses near Elmwood, and bringing with him English public school thoroughness and severity, gave the boy a drilling in Latin, which he must have made almost a native speech, to judge by the ease with which he handled it afterward in mock heroics. Of course he went to Harvard College. He lived at his father's house, more than a mile away from the college yard, but this could have been no great privation to him, for he had the freedom of his friends' rooms, and he loved the open air. The Reverend Edward Everett Hale has given a sketch of their common life in college. "He was a little older than I," he says, "and was 1 class in advance of me. My older brother, with whom I lived in college, and he were the most intimate friends. He had no room within the college walls, and was a great deal with us. The fashion of Cambridge was then literary. Now the fashion of Cambridge runs to social problems, but then we were interested in literature. We read Byron and Shelley and Keats, and we began to read Tennyson and Browning. I first heard of Tennyson from Lowell, who had borrowed from Mr. Emerson the little first volume of Tennyson. We actually passed about Tennyson's poems in manuscript. Carlyle's essays were being printed at the time, and his French Revolution. In such a community, not 250 students all told, literary effort was, as I say, the fashion, and literary men, among whom Lowell was recognized from the very first, were special favorites. Indeed, there was that in him which made him a favorite everywhere. Lowell was but 15 years old when he entered college, in the class which graduated in 1838. He was a reader, as so many of his fellows were, and the letters which he wrote shortly after leaving college show how intent he had been on making acquaintance with the best things in literature. He began also to scribble verse, and he wrote both poems and essays for college magazines. His class chose him their poet for class day, and he wrote his poem. But he was careless about conforming to college regulations respecting attendance at morning prayers, and for this was suspended from college the last term of his last year, and not allowed to come back to read his poem. I have heard in later years, says Dr. Hale, what I did not know then, that he rode down from Concord in a canvas-covered wagon, and peeped out through the chinks of the wagon to see the dancing round the tree. I fancy he received 1 or 2 visits from his friends in the wagon, but in those times it would have been treason to speak of this. He was sent to Concord for his rustication, and so passed a few weeks of his youth among scenes dear to every lover of American letters. 3. The First Venture. After his graduation, he set about the study of law, and for a short time even was a clerk in a counting room, but his bent was strongly towards literature. There was at that time no magazine of commanding importance in America, and young men were given to starting magazines with enthusiasm and very little other capital. Such a one was the Boston Miscellany, launched by Nathan Hale, Lowell's college friend, and for this Lowell wrote gaily. It lived a year, and shortly after Lowell himself, with Robert Carter, essayed the Pioneer in 1843. It lived just 3 months, but in that time printed contributions by Lowell, Hawthorne, Whittier, Story, Poe, and Dr. Parsons, a group which it would be hard to match in any of the little magazines that hop across the world's path today. Lowell had already collected, in 1841, the poems which he had written, and sometimes contributed to periodicals into a volume entitled A Year's Life, but he retained very little of the contents in later editions of his poems. The book has a special interest, however, from its dedication in veiled phrase to Maria White. He became engaged to this lady in the fall of 1840, and the next 12 years of his life were profoundly affected by her influence. Herself a poet of delicate power, she brought into his life an intelligent sympathy with his work. It was, however, her strong moral enthusiasm, her lofty conception of purity and justice, which kindled his spirit and gave force and direction to a character which was ready to respond, and yet might otherwise have delayed active expression. They were not married until 1844, but they were not far apart in their homes. And during these years Lowell was making those early ventures in literature, and first raids upon political and moral evil, which foretold the direction of his later work, and gave some hint of its abundance. About the time of his marriage, he published 2 books, which by their character show pretty well the divided interest of his life. His bent from the beginning was more decidedly literary than that of any contemporary American poet. That is to say, the history and art of literature divided his interest with the production of literature, and he carried the unusual gift of a rare critical power, joined to hearty, spontaneous creation. It may indeed be guessed that the keenness of judgment and incisiveness of wit which characterize his examination of literature sometimes interfered with his poetic power, and made him liable to question his art when he would rather have expressed it unchecked. One of the two books was a volume of poems, the other was a prose work, Conversations on Some of the Old Poets. He did not keep this book alive, but it is interesting as marking the enthusiasm of a young scholar, treading a way then almost wholly neglected in America, and intimating a line of thought and study in which he afterward made most noteworthy venture. Another series of poems followed in 1848, and in the same year the Vision of Sir Launfal. Perhaps it was in reaction from the marked sentiment of his poetry that he issued now a jeu d'esprit, a fable for critics, in which he hit off with a rough and ready wit the characteristics of the writers of the day, not forgetting himself in these lines. There is Lowell, who's striving Parnassus to climb, with a whole bale of isms tied together with rhyme. He might get on alone, spite of brambles and boulders, but he can't with that bundle he has on his shoulders. The top of the hill he will ne'er come nigh reaching, till he learns the distinction twixt singing and preaching. His lyre has some chords that would ring pretty well, but he'd rather by half make a drum of the shell, and rattle away till he's old as Methusalem at the head of a march to the last New Jerusalem. This, of course, is but a half-serious portrait of himself, and it touches but a single feature. Others can say better that Lowell's ardent nature showed itself in the series of satirical poems which made him famous, the Biglow Papers, written in a spirit of indignation and fine scorn, when the Mexican War was causing many Americans to blush with shame at the use of the country by a class for its own ignoble ends. Lowell and his wife, who brought a fervid anti-slavery temper as part of her marriage portion, were both contributors to the Liberty Bell, and Lowell was a frequent contributor to the Anti-Slavery Standard, and was indeed, for a while, a corresponding editor. In June 1846 there appeared one day in the Boston Courier a letter from Mr. Ezekiel Biglow of Geelong to the editor, Hon. Joseph T. Buckingham, enclosing a poem of his son, Mr. Hosea Biglow. It was no new thing to seek to arrest the public attention with the vernacular applied to public affairs. Major Jack Downing and Sam Slick had been notable examples, and they had many imitators. But the reader who laughed over the racy narrative of the unlettered Ezekiel, and then took up Hosea's poem and caught the gust of Yankee wrath and humor blown fresh in his face, knew that he was in at the appearance of something new in American literature. The force which Lowell displayed in these satires made his book at once a powerful ally of an anti-slavery sentiment, which heretofore had been ridiculed. 4. Verse and Prose. A year in Europe, 1851 to 1852, with his wife, whose health was then precarious, stimulated his scholarly interests, and gave substance to his study of Dante and Italian literature. In October 1853 his wife died. She had borne him 3 children. The firstborn, Blanche, died in infancy. The second, Walter, also died young. The third, a daughter, Mrs. Burnett, survived her parents. In 1855 he was chosen successor to Longfellow as Smith Professor of the French and Spanish languages and literature, and Professor of Belles Lettres in Harvard College. He spent 2 years in Europe in further preparation for the duties of his office, and in 1857 was again established in Cambridge, and installed in his academic chair. He married also at this time Miss Frances Dunlap of Portland, Maine. Lowell was now in his 39th year. As a scholar, in his professional work, he had acquired a versatile knowledge of the Romance languages, and was an adept in Old French and Provençal poetry. He had given a course of 12 lectures on English poetry before the Lowell Institute in Boston, which had made a strong impression on the community, and his work on a series of British poets, in connection with Professor Child, especially his biographical sketch of Keats, had been recognized as of a high order. In poetry he had published the volumes already mentioned. In general literature he had printed in magazines the papers which he afterward collected into his volume, Fireside Travels. Not long after, he entered on his college duties. The Atlantic Monthly was started, and the editorship given to him. He held the office for a year or two only, but he continued to write for the magazine. and in 1862 he was associated with Mr. Charles Eliot Norton in the conduct of the North American Review, and continued in this charge for 10 years. Much of his prose was contributed to this periodical. Anyone reading the titles of the papers, which comprise the volumes of his prose writings, will readily see how much literature, and especially poetic literature, occupied his attention. Shakespeare, Dryden, Lessing, Rousseau, Dante, Spenser, Wordsworth, Milton, Keats, Carlyle, Percival, Thoreau, Swinburne, Chaucer, Emerson, Pope, Gray. These are the principal subjects of his prose, and the range of topics indicates the catholicity of his taste. In these papers, when studying poetry, he was very alive to the personality of the poets, and it was the strong interest in humanity which led Lowell, when he was most diligent in the pursuit of literature, to apply himself also to history and politics. Several of his essays bear witness to this, such as Witchcraft, New England 2 Centuries Ago, A Great Public Character, Josiah Quincy, Abraham Lincoln, and his great political essays. But the most remarkable of his writings of this order was the second series of the Biglow Papers, published during the War for the Union. In these, with the wit and fun of the earlier series, there was mingled a deeper strain of feeling and a larger tone of patriotism. The limitations of his style in these satires forbade the fullest expression of his thought and emotion, but afterward, in a succession of poems, occasioned by the honors paid to student soldiers in Cambridge, the death of Agassiz, and the celebration of national anniversaries during the years 1875 and 1876, he sang in loftier, more ardent strains. The most famous of these poems was his noble Commemoration Ode. 5. Public life. It was at the close of this period, when he had done incalculable service to the Republic, that Lowell was called on to represent the country, first in Madrid, where he was sent in 1877, and then in London, to which he was transferred in 1880. 8 years were thus spent by him in the foreign service of the country. He had a good knowledge of the Spanish language and literature when he went to Spain, but he at once took pains to make his knowledge fuller and his accent more perfect, so that he could have intimate relations with the best Spanish men of the time. In England he was at once a most welcome guest, and was in great demand as a public speaker. No one can read his dispatches from Madrid and London without being struck by his sagacity, his readiness in emergencies, his interest in and quick perception of the political situation in the country where he was resident, and his unerring knowledge as a man of the world. Above all, he was through and through an American, true to the principles which underlie American institutions. His address on democracy, which he delivered in England, is one of the great statements of human liberty. A few years later, after his return to America, he gave another address to his own countrymen on the place of the independent in politics. It was a noble defense of his own position, not without a trace of discouragement at the apparently sluggish movement in American self-government of recent years, but with that faith in the substance of his countrymen which gave him the right to use words of honest warning. The public life of Mr. Lowell made him more of a figure before the world. He received honors from societies and universities. He was decorated by the highest honors which Harvard could pay officially, and Oxford and Cambridge, St. Andrews and Edinburgh, and Bologna gave gowns. He established warm personal relations with Englishmen, and after his release from public office he made several visits to England. There, too, was buried his wife, who died in 1885. The closing years of his life in his own country, though touched with domestic loneliness and diminished by growing physical infirmities that predicted his death, were rich also with the continued expression of his large personality. He delivered the public address in commemoration of the 250th anniversary of the founding of Harvard University. He gave a course of lectures on the old English dramatists before the Lowell Institute. He collected a volume of his poems. He wrote and spoke on public affairs, and, the year before his death, revised, rearranged, and carefully edited a definitive series of his writings in 10 volumes. He died at Elmwood, August 12, 1891. Since his death, 3 small volumes have been added to his collected writings, and Mr. Norton has published Letters of James Russell Lowell in 2 volumes. End of section 1. Section 2 of the Vision of Sir Launfal and Other Poems by James Russell Lowell. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Recording by Phil Schempf. Introductory Note. Lowell was in his 30th year when he wrote and published The Vision of Sir Launfal. It appeared when he had just dashed off his Fable for Critics, and when he was in the thick of the anti-slavery fight, writing poetry and prose for the Anti-Slavery Standard, and sending out his witty Biglow papers. He had married 4 years before, and was living in the homestead at Elmwood, walking in the country about, and full of eagerness at the prospect which lay before him. In a letter to his friend Charles F. Briggs, written in December 1848, he says, "Last night I walked to Watertown over the snow, with the new moon before me and a sky exactly like that in Page's Evening Landscape. Orion was rising behind me, and as I stood on the hill just before you entered the village, the stillness of the fields around me was delicious, broken only by the tinkle of a little brook, which runs too swiftly for frost to catch it. My picture of the brook in Sir Launfal was drawn from it. But why do I send you this description, like the bones of a chicken I had picked? Simply because I was so happy as I stood there, and felt so sure of doing something that would justify my friends. But why do I not say that I have done something? I believe that I have done better than the world knows yet, but the past seems so little compared with the future. I am the first poet who has endeavored to express the American idea, and I shall be popular by and by." It is not very likely that Lowell was thinking of Sir Launfal when he wrote this last sentence, yet it is not straining language too far to say that when he took up an Arthurian story he had a different attitude toward the whole cycle of legends from that of Tennyson, who had lately been reviving the legends for the pleasure of the English-reading people. The exuberance of the poet, as he carols of June in the prelude to Part First, is an expression of the joyous spring which was in the veins of the young American, glad in the sense of freedom and hope. As Tennyson threw into his retelling of Arthurian romance a moral sense, so Lowell, also a moralist in his poetic apprehension, made a parable of his tale, and in the broadest interpretation of democracy sang of the levelling of all ranks in a common divine humanity. There is a subterranean passage connecting the Biglow papers with Sir Launfal. It is the holy zeal which attacks slavery issuing in this fable of a beautiful charity, Christ in the guise of a beggar. The invention is a very simple one, and appears to have been suggested by Tennyson's Sir Galahad, though Lowell had no doubt read Sir Thomas Malory's Morte d'Arthur. The following is the note which accompanied the Vision when first published in 1848, and retained by Lowell in all subsequent editions. According to the mythology of the romancers, the Sangreal, or Holy Grail, was the cup out of which Jesus Christ partook of the Last Supper with his disciples. It was brought into England by Joseph of Arimathea, and remained there, an object of pilgrimage and adoration for many years in the keeping of his lineal descendants. It was incumbent upon those who had charge of it to be chaste in thought, word, and deed. But one of the keepers having broken this condition, the Holy Grail disappeared. From that time it was a favorite enterprise of the knights of Arthur's court to go in search of it. Sir Galahad was at last successful in finding it, as may be read in the 17th book of the romance of King Arthur. Tennyson has made Sir Galahad the subject of one of the most exquisite of his poems. The plot, if I may give that name to anything so slight, of the following poem is my own, and to serve its purposes I have enlarged the circle of competition in search of the miraculous cup, in such a manner as to include not only other persons than the heroes of the Round Table, but also a period of time subsequent to the date of King Arthur's reign. End of section 2. Section 3 of the Vision of Sir Launfal and Other Poems by James Russell Lowell. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Recording by Phil Schempf. The Vision of Sir Launfal, Prelude to Part First. Over his keys the musing organist, beginning doubtfully and far away, first lets his fingers wander as they list, and builds a bridge from dreamland for his lay. Then, as the touch of his loved instrument gives hope and fervor, nearer draws his theme, first guessed by faint auroral flushes sent along the wavering vista of his dream. Not only around our infancy doth heaven with all its splendors lie, daily, with souls that cringe and plot, we Sinai's climb and know it not. Over our manhood bend the skies, against our fallen and traitor lives. The great winds utter prophecies. With our faint hearts the mountain strives. Its arms outstretched, the druid wood waits with its benedicity, and to our age's drowsy blood still shouts the inspiring sea. Earth gets its price for what earth gives us. The beggar is taxed for a corner to die in. The priest hath his fee who comes and shrives us. We bargain for the graves we lie in. At the devil's booth are all things sold. Each ounce of dross costs its ounce of gold. For a cap and bells our lives we pay. Bubbles we buy with a whole soul's tasking. 'Tis heaven alone that is given away. 'Tis only God may be had for the asking. No price is set on the lavish summer. June may be had by the poorest comer. And what is so rare as a day in June? Then, if ever, come perfect days. Then heaven tries the earth, if it be in tune, and over it softly her warm ear lays. Whether we look or whether we listen, we hear life murmur or see it glisten. Every clod feels a stir of might, an instinct within it that reaches and towers, and, groping blindly above it for light, climbs to a soul in grass and flowers. The flush of life may well be seen thrilling back over hills and valleys. The cowslip startles in meadows green. The buttercup catches the sun in its chalice. And there's never a leaf nor a blade too mean to be some happy creature's palace. The little bird sits at his door in the sun, atilt like a blossom among the leaves, and lets his illumined being o'errun with the deluge of summer it receives. His mate feels the eggs beneath her wings, and the heart in her dumb breast flutters and sings. He sings to the wide world, and she to her nest. In the nice ear of nature which song is the best? Now is the high tide of the year, and whatever of life hath ebbed away comes flooding back with a ripply cheer into every bare inlet and creek and bay. Now the heart is so full that a drop o'erfills it. We are happy now because God wills it. No matter how barren the past may have been, 'tis enough for us now that the leaves are green. We sit in the warm shade and feel right well how the sap creeps up and the blossoms swell. We may shut our eyes, but we cannot help knowing that skies are clear and grass is growing. The breeze comes whispering in our ear that dandelions are blossoming near, that maize has sprouted, that streams are flowing, that the river is bluer than the sky, that the robin is plastering his house hard by. And if the breeze kept the good news back, for other couriers we should not lack. We could guess it all by yon heifer's lowing. And hark! How clear and bold Chanticleer, warmed with the new wine of the year, tells all in his lusty crowing. Joy comes, grief goes, we know not how. Everything is happy now. Everything is upward striving. 'Tis as easy now for the heart to be true as for grass to be green or skies to be blue. 'Tis the natural way of living. Who knows whither the clouds have fled? In the unscarred heaven they leave no wake, and the eyes forget the tears they have shed. The heart forgets its sorrow and ache. The soul partakes of the season's youth, and the sulphurous rifts of passion and woe lie deep 'neath a silence pure and smooth, like burnt-out craters healed with snow. What wonder if Sir Launfal now remembered the keeping of his vow? Part First. 1. My golden spurs now bring to me, and bring to me my richest mail, for tomorrow I go over land and sea in search of the Holy Grail. Shall never a bed for me be spread, nor shall a pillow be under my head, till I begin my vow to keep. Here on the rushes I will sleep, and perchance there may come a vision true, ere the day create the world anew. Slowly Sir Launfal's eyes grew dim, slumber fell like a cloud on him, and into his soul the vision flew. 2. The crows flapped over by twos and threes. In the pool drowsed the cattle up to their knees. The little birds sang as if it were the one day of summer in all the year, and the very leaves seemed to sing on the trees. The castle alone in the landscape lay, like an outpost of winter dull and grey. 'Twas the proudest hall in the north country, and never its gates might open be save to lord or lady of high degree. Summer besieged it on every side, but the churlish stone her assaults defied. She could not scale the chilly wall, though around it for leagues her pavilions tall stretched left and right, over the hills and out of sight. Green and broad was every tent, and out of each a murmur went, till the breeze fell off at night. 3. The drawbridge dropped with a surly clang, and through the dark arch a charger sprang, bearing Sir Launfal, the maiden knight in his gilded mail, that flamed so bright it seemed the dark castle had gathered all those shafts the fierce sun had shot over its wall in his siege of 300 summers long, and binding them all in one blazing sheaf, had cast them forth, so young and strong, and lightsome as a locust leaf. Sir Launfal flashed forth in his unscarred mail, to seek in all climes for the Holy Grail. 4. It was morning on hill and stream and tree, and morning in the young knight's heart. Only the castle moodily rebuffed the gifts of the sunshine free, and gloomed by itself apart. The season brimmed all other things up, full as the rain fills the pitcher plant's cup. 5. As Sir Launfal made morn through the darksome gate, he was ware of a leper crouched by the same, who begged with his hand and moaned as he sate, and a loathing over Sir Launfal came. The sunshine went out of his soul with a thrill, the flesh 'neath his armour 'gan shrank and crawl, and midway its leap his heart stood still like a frozen waterfall. For this man, so foul and bent of stature, rasped harshly against his dainty nature, and seemed the one blot on the summer morn, so he tossed him a piece of gold in scorn. 6. The leper raised not the gold from the dust. Better to me the poor man's crust, better the blessing of the poor, though I turn me empty from his door. That is no true alms which the hand can hold. He gives nothing but worthless gold who gives from a sense of duty. But he who gives but a slender mite, and gives to that which is out of sight, that thread of all-sustaining beauty, which runs through all, and doth all unite. The hand cannot clasp the whole of his alms. The heart outstretches its eager palms, for a God goes with it, and makes its store to the soul that was starving in darkness before. Prelude to Part Second. Down swept the chill wind from the mountain peak, from the snow 5,000 summers old. On open wold and hilltop bleak it had gathered all the cold, and whirled it like sleet on the wanderer's cheek. It carried a shiver everywhere from the unleafed boughs and pastures bare. The little brook heard it, and built a roof, 'neath which he could house him winter-proof. All night by the white stars' frosty gleams he groined his arches and matched his beams. Slender and clear were his crystal spars, as the lashes of light that trim the stars. He sculpted every summer delight in his halls and chambers out of sight. Sometimes his tinkering waters slipped down through a frost-leaved forest crypt. long sparkling aisles of steel-stemmed trees, bending to counterfeit a breeze. Sometimes the roof no fretwork knew, but silvery mosses that downward grew. Sometimes it was carved in sharp relief with quaint arabesques of ice-fern leaf. Sometimes it was simply smooth and clear, for the gladness of heaven to shine through. And here he had caught the nodding bulrush tops, and hung them thickly with diamond drops that crystallized the beams of moon and sun, and made a star of every one. No mortal builder's most rare device could match this winter palace of ice. 'Twas as if every image that mirrored lay in his depths serene through the summer day. Each fleeting shadow of earth and sky, lest the happy model should be lost, had been mimicked in fairy masonry by the elfin builders of the frost. Within the hall are song and laughter, the cheeks of Christmas grow red and jolly, and sprouting is every corbel and rafter with lightsome green of ivy and holly. Through the deep gulf of the chimney wide wallows the Yule log's roaring tide. The broad flame pennons droop and flap and belly and tug as a flag in the wind. Like a locust shrills the imprisoned sap, hunted to death in its galleries blind. The swift little troops of silent sparks, now pausing, now scattering away as in fear, go threading the soot forest's tangled darks like herds of startled deer. But the wind without was eager and sharp. Of Sir Launfal's grey hair it makes a harp, and rattles and rings the icy strings, singing in dreary monotone a Christmas carol of its own, whose burden still, as he might guess, was shelterless, shelterless, shelterless. The voice of the seneschal flared like a torch as he shouted the wanderer away from the porch, and he sat in the gateway and saw all night the great hall fire, so cheery and bold, through the window slits of the castle old, build out its piers of ruddy light against the drift of the cold. Part Second. 1. There was never a leaf on bush or tree. The bare boughs rattled shudderingly. The river was dumb and could not speak, for the weaver winter its shroud had spun. A single crow on the tree-top bleak from his shining feathers shed off the cold sun. Again it was morning, but shrunk and cold, as if her veins were sapless and old, and she rose up decrepitly for a last dim look at earth and sea. 2. Sir Launfal turned from his own hard gate for another heir in his earldom sate. An old bent man, worn out and frail, he came back from seeking the Holy Grail. Little he recked of his earldom's loss, no more on his surcoat was blazoned the cross, but deep in his soul the sign he wore, the badge of suffering and the poor. 3. Sir Launfal's raiment, thin and spare, was idle mail 'gainst the barbed air, for it was just at the Christmas time, so he mused as he sat of a sunnier clime, and sought for a shelter from the cold and snow in the light and warmth of long ago. He sees the snake-like caravan crawl o'er the edge of the desert, black and small, then nearer and nearer, till one by one he can count the camels in the sun, as over the red-hot sands they pass, to where in its slender necklace of grass the little spring laughed and leapt in the shade, and with its own self like an infant played, and waved its signal of palms. 4. For Christ's sweet sake, I beg an alms. The happy camels may reach the spring, but Sir Launfal sees only the gruesome thing, the leper, lank as the rain-blanched bone, that cowers beside him, a thing as lone and white as the ice isles of northern seas, in the desolate horror of his disease. 5. And Sir Launfal said, I behold in thee an image of him who died on the tree. Thou also hast had thy crown of thorns. Thou hast had the world's buffets and scorns. and to thy life were not denied the wounds in the hands and feet and side. Mild Mary's Son, acknowledge me. Behold, through him I give to thee. 6. Then the soul of the leper stood up in his eyes, and looked at Sir Launfal, and straightway he remembered in what a haughtier guise he had flung an alms to leprosy, when he girt his young life up in gilded mail and set forth in search of the Holy Grail. The heart within him was ashes and dust. He parted in twain his single crust. He broke the ice on the streamlet's brink, and gave the leper to eat and drink. 'Twas a mouldy crust of coarse brown bread, 'twas water out of a wooden bowl. Yet with fine wheaten bread was the leper fed, and 'twas red wine he drank with his thirsty soul. 7. As Sir Launfal mused with a downcast face, a light shone round about the place. The leper no longer crouched at his side, but stood before him glorified, shining and tall and fair and straight, as the pillar that stood by the beautiful gate. Himself the gate whereby men can enter the temple of God in man. 8. His words were shed softer than leaves from the pine, and they fell on Sir Launfal as snows on the brine, that mingle their softness and quiet in one with the shaggy unrest they float down upon. And the voice that was calmer than silence said, Lo, it is I, be not afraid. In many climes without a veil thou hast spent thy life for the Holy Grail. Behold, it is here, this cup which thou didst fill at the streamlet for me but now. This crust is my body broken for thee, this water his blood that died on the tree. The Holy Supper is kept indeed, in whatso we share with another's need. Not what we give, but what we share, for the gift without the giver is bare. Who gives himself with his alms feeds three, himself, his hungering neighbor, and me. 9. Sir Launfal awoke as from a swound. The Grail in my castle here is found. Hang my idle armour up on the wall. Let it be the spider's banquet hall. He must be fenced with stronger mail who would seek and find the Holy Grail. 10. The castle gate stands open now, and the wanderer is welcome to the hall, as the hang-bird is to the elm-tree bough. No longer scowl the turrets tall. The summer's long siege at last is o'er, when the first poor outcast went in at the door. She entered with him in disguise, and mastered the fortress by surprise. There is no spot she loves so well on ground. She lingers and smiles there the whole year round. The meanest serf on Sir Launfal's land has hall and bower at his command. And there's no poor man in the north country but is lord of the earldom as much as he. End of section 3. Section 4 of the Vision of Sir Launfal and Other Poems by James Russell Lowell. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Recording by Phil Schempf. Ode recited at the Harvard Commemoration. On the 21st of July, 1865, Harvard University welcomed back those of its students and graduates who had fought in the war for the Union. By exercises in the church and at the festival which followed, the services of the dead and the living were commemorated. It was on this occasion that Mr. Lowell recited the following ode. 1. Weak-winged is song, nor aims at that clear ethered height whither the brave deed climbs for light. We seem to do them wrong, bringing our robin's leaf to deck their hearse. Who in warm life-blood wrote their nobler verse, our trivial song to honor those who come with ears attuned to strenuous trump and drum, and shaped in squadron strophes their desire, live battle odes whose lines were steel and fire. Yet sometimes feathered words are strong, a gracious memory to buoy up and save from Lethe's dreamless ooze the common grave of the unventurous throng. 2. Today our Reverend Mother welcomes back her wisest scholars, those who understood the deeper teaching of her mystic tome, and offered their fresh lives to make it good. No lore of Greece or Rome, no science peddling with the names of things, or reading stars to find inglorious fates, can lift our life with wings, far from death's idle gulf that for the many waits, and lengthen out our dates with that clear fame whose memory sings in manly hearts to come, and nerves them and dilates, nor such thy teaching, Mother of us all, not such the trumpet call of thy diviner mood, that could thy sons entice from happy homes and toils, the fruitful nest of those half-virtues which the world calls best, into war's tumult rude. But rather, far that stern device the sponsors chose that round thy cradle stood, in the dim unventured wood. The veritas that lurks beneath the letter's unprolific sheath, life of whate'er makes life worth living, seed grain of high emprise, immortal food, one heavenly thing, whereof earth hath the giving. 3. Many love truth, and lavished life's best oil amidst the dust of books to find her, content at last, for guerdon of their toil, with the cast mantle she had left behind her. Many in sad faith sought for her, many with crossed hands sighed for her, but these, our brothers, fought for her, at life's dear peril wrought for her, so loved her that they died for her, tasting the raptured fleetness of her divine completeness. Their higher instinct knew, those love her best who to themselves are true, and what they dared to dream of, dared to do, they followed her and found her where all may hope to find, not in the ashes of the burnt-out mind, but beautiful, with danger's sweetness round her, where faith made whole with deed breathes its awakening breath into the lifeless creed. They saw her plumed and mailed, with sweet stern face unveiled, and all repaying eyes look proud on them in death. 4. Our slender life runs rippling by, and glides into the silent hollow of the past. What is there that abides to make the next age better for the last? Is earth too poor to give us something to live for here that shall outlive us? Some more substantial boon, that such as flows and ebbs with fortune's fickle moon. The little that we see from doubt is never free. The little that we do is but half nobly true. With our laborious hiving what men call treasure, and the gods call dross, life seems a jest of fate's contriving, only secure in everyone's conniving. A long account of nothings paid with loss, where we poor puppets, jerked by unseen wires, after our little hour of strut and rave, with all our pasteboard passions and desires, loves, hates, ambitions, and immortal fires, are tossed pell-mell together in the grave. But stay, no age was e'er degenerate, unless men held it too cheap a rate, for in our likeness still we shape our fate. Ah, there is something here, unfathomed by the cynic's sneer, something that gives our feeble light a high immunity from night, something that leaps life's narrow bars, to claim its birthright with the hosts of heaven, a seed of sunshine that doth leaven our earthly dullness with the beams of stars, and glorify our clay. With light from fountains elder that day, a conscience more divine than we, a gladness fed with secret tears, a vexing forward-reaching sense of some more noble permanence, a light across the sea which haunts the soul and will not let it be, still glimmering from the heights of undegenerate years. 5. Whither leads the path? To ampler fates that leads? Not down through flowery meads, to reap an aftermath of youth's vainglorious weeds, but up the steep, amid the wrath and shock of deadly hostile creeds, where the world's best hope and stay by battle's flashes gropes a desperate way, and every turf the fierce foot clings to bleeds. Peace hath her not ignoble wreath, ere yet the sharp, decisive word light the black lips of cannon, and the sword dreams in its easeful sheath. But some day the live coal behind the thought, whether from Baal's stone obscene, or from the shrine serene of God's pure altar brought, bursts up in flame, the war of tongue and pen, learns with what deadly purpose it was fraught, and helpless in the fiery passion caught, shakes all the pillared state with shock of men. Some day the soft ideal that we wooed confronts us fiercely, foe beset, pursued, and cries reproachful, "Was it, then, my praise, and not myself was loved? Prove now thy truth, I claim of thee the promise of thy youth. Give me thy life, or cower in empty phrase, the victim of thy genius, not its mate. Life may be given in many ways, and loyalty to truth be sealed, as bravely in the closet as the field. So bountiful is fate. But then to stand beside her when craven churls deride her, to front a lie in arms and not to yield, this shows, methinks, God's plan, and measure of a stalwart man, limbed like the old heroic breeds, who stands self-poised on manhood's solid earth, not forced to frame excuses for his birth, fed from within with all the strength he needs. 6. Such was he, our martyred chief, whom late the nation he had led with ashes on her head, wept with the passion of an angry grief. Forgive me, if from present things I turn to speak what in my heart will beat and burn, and hang my wreath on his world-honored urn. Nature, they say, doth dote, and cannot make a man save on some worn-out plan, repeating us by rote. From him her old world moulds aside she threw, and choosing sweet clay from the breast of the unexhausted West, with stuff untainted shaped a hero new, wise, steadfast in the strength of God, and true. How beautiful to see once more a shepherd of mankind indeed, who loved his charge, but never loved to lead. One whose meek flock the people joyed to be, not lured by any cheat of birth, but by his clear-grained human worth and brave old wisdom of sincerity. They knew that outward grace is dust. They could not choose but trust in that sure-footed mind's unfaltering skill and supple-tempered will, that bent like perfect steel to spring again and thrust. He was no lonely mountain peak of mind, thrusting to thin air or our cloudy bars, a sea mark now lost in vapors blind, broad prairie rather, genial, level-lined, fruitful and friendly for all humankind, yet also nigh to heaven, and loved of loftiest stars, nothing of Europe here, or then of Europe fronting mornward still, ere any names of serf and peer could nature's equal scheme deface and thwart her genial will. Here was a type of the true elder race, and one of Plutarch's men talked with us face to face. I praise him not, it were too late, and some innative weakness there must be in him who condescends to victory, such as the present gives, and cannot wait, safe in himself as in a fate. So always firmly he knew to bide his time, and can his fame abide. Still patient in his simple faith sublime, till the wise years decide. Great captains, with their guns and drums, disturb our judgment for the hour, but at last silence comes. These all are gone, and standing like a tower, our children shall behold his fame, the kindly, earnest, brave, foreseeing man, sagacious, patient, dreading praise, not blame, new birth of our new soil, the first American. 7. Long as man's hopes insatiate can discern, or only guess some more inspiring goal, outside of self, enduring as the pole, along whose course the flying axles burn of spirits bravely pitched, earth's manlier brood, long as below we cannot find the meed that stills the inexorable mind, so long this faith to some ideal good, under whatever mortal name it masks, freedom, law, country, this ethereal mood, that thanks the fates for their severer tasks, feeling it challenged pulses leap, while others sulk in subterfuges cheap and set in danger's van, has all the boon it asks, shall win man's praise and woman's love, shall be a wisdom that we set above all other skills and gifts to culture dear, a virtue round whose forehead we enwreath laurels that with a living passion breathe. When other crowns grow, while we twine them sere, what brings us thronging these high rites to pay, and seal these hours the noblest of our year, save that our brothers found this better way? 8. We sit here in the promised land that flows with freedom's honey and milk, but 'twas they won it, sword in hand, making the nettle danger soft for us as silk. We welcome back our bravest and our best. Ah me, not all, some come not with the rest, who went forth brave and bright as any here. I strive to mix some gladness with my strain, but the sad strings complain and will not please the ear. I sweep them for a paean, but they wane again and yet again into a dirge and die away in pain. In these brave ranks I only see the gaps, thinking of dear ones whom the dumb turf wraps. Dark to the triumph which they died to gain. Fitlier may others greet the living. For me the past is unforgiving. I will uncover head, salute the sacred dead who went and who return not. Say not so. 'Tis not the grapes of Canaan that repay, but the high faith that failed not by the way. Virtue treads paths that end not in the grave. No bar of endless night exiles the brave. And to the saner mind, we rather seem the dead that stayed behind. Blow, trumpets, all your exaltations blow, for never shall their aureoled presence lack. I see them muster in a gleaming row, with ever youthful brows that nobler show we find in our dull road their shining track. In every nobler mood we feel the orient of their spirit glow, part of our unalterable good. Of all our saintlier aspiration, they come transfigured back, secure from change in their high-hearted ways, beautiful evermore, and with the rays of morn on their white shields of expectation. 9. But is there hope to save even this ethereal essence from the grave? Whatever scaped oblivion's subtle wrong, save a few clarion names or golden threads of song. Before my musing eye the mighty ones of old sweep by, disvoiced now and insubstantial things, as noisy once as we, poor ghosts of kings, shadows of empire wholly gone to dust, and many races, nameless long ago, to darkness driven by that imperious gust of ever-rushing time that here doth blow. O visionary world, condition strange, where not abiding is but only change, where the deep-bolted stars themselves still shift and range, shall we to more continuance make pretence? Renown builds tombs, a life estate is wit, and bit by bit the cunning years steal all from us but woe. Leaves are we, whose decay no harvest sow. But when we vanish hence, shall they lie forceless in the dark below, save to make green their little length of sods, or deepen pansies for a year or two? Who now to us are shining sweet as gods? Was dying all they had the skill to do? That were not fruitless, but the soul resents such short-lived service as if blind events rule without her, or earth could so endure. She claims a more divine investure of longer tenure than fame's airy rents. Whate'er she touches doth her nature share. Her inspiration haunts the ennobled air, gives eyes to mountains blind, ears to the deaf earth, voices to the wind, and her clear trump sings succor everywhere, by lonely bivouacs to the wakeful mind. For soul inherits all that soul could dare. Yea, manhood hath a wider span and larger privilege of life than man. The single deed, the private sacrifice, so radiant now through proudly hidden tears, is covered up ere long from mortal eyes, with thoughtless drift of the deciduous years. But that high privilege that makes all men peers, that leap of heart whereby a people rise up to a noble anger's height, and, flamed on by the fates, not shrink, but grow more bright. That swift validity in noble veins, of choosing danger and disdaining shame, of being set on flame, by the pure fire that flies all contact base, but wraps its chosen with angelic might, these are imperishable gains. Sure as the sun, medicinal as light, these hold great futures in their lusty reigns, and certify to earth a new imperial race. 10. Who now shall sneer? Who dare again to say we trace our lines to a plebeian race, Roundhead and Cavalier? Dumb are those names erewhile in battle loud. Dream-footed as the shadow of a cloud, they flit across the ear. That is best blood that hath most iron in't, to edge resolve with, pouring without stint for what makes manhood dear. Tell us not of Plantagenets, Habsburgs, and Guelphs, whose thin blood crawls down from some victor in a border brawl. How poor their outworn coronets, matched with one leaf of that plain civic wreath our brave for honour's blazon shall bequeath, through whose desert a rescued nation sets her heel on treason, and the trumpet hears shout victory, tingling Europe's sullen ears with vain resentments and more vain regrets. 11. Not in anger, not in pride, pure from passion's mixture rude, ever to base earth allied, but with far-heard gratitude, still with heart and voice renewed, to heroes living and dear martyrs dead, the strain should close that consecrates our brave. Lift the heart and lift the head, lofty be its mood and grave, not without a martial ring, not without a prouder tread and a peal of exultation. Little right has he to sing through whose heart in such an hour beats no march of conscious power, sweeps no tumult of elation. 'Tis no man we celebrate by his country's victories great, a hero half, and half the whim of fate, but the pith and marrow of a nation drawing force from all her men, highest, humblest, weakest, all, for her time of need, and then pulsing it again through them, till the basest can no longer cower, feeling his soul spring up, divinely tall, touched but in passing by her mantle hem. Come back then, noble pride, for 'tis her dower. How could poet ever tower, if his passions, hopes, and fears, if his triumphs and his tears kept not measure with his people? Boom, cannon, boom, to all the winds and waves. Clash out, glad bells, from every rocking steeple. Banners, advance with triumph, bend your staves, and from every mountain peak let beacon fire to answering beacon speak. Katahdin tell Monadnock, white-face he, and so leapt on in light from sea to sea, till the glad news be sent across a kindling continent, making earth feel more firm and air breathe braver. Be proud, for she is saved, and all have helped to save her. She that lifts up the manhood of the poor, she of the open soul and open door, with room about her hearth for all mankind. The fire is dreadful in her eyes no more. From her bold front the helm she doth unbind, sends all her handmaid armies back to spin, and bids her navies, that so lately hurled their crashing battle, hold their thunders in, swimming like birds of calm along the unharmful shore. No challenge sends she to the elder world, that looked askance and hated. A light scorn plays o'er her mouth, as round her mighty knees she calls her children back, and waits the morn of nobler day, enthroned between her subject seas. 12. Bow down, dear land, for thou hast found release. Thy God in these distempered days hath taught thee the sure wisdom of his ways, and through thine enemies hath wrought thy peace. Bow down in prayer and praise. No poorest in thy borders, but may now lift to the juster skies a man's enfranchised brow. O beautiful, my country, ours once more, smoothing thy gold of war dishevelled hair, or such sweet brows as never other wore, and letting thy set lips, freed from wrath's pale eclipse, rosy edges of their smile lay bare. What words divine, of lover or of poet, could tell our love and make thee know it, among the nations bright beyond compare? What were our lives without thee? What all our lives to save thee? We reck not what we gave thee. We will not dare to doubt thee, but ask whatever else, and we will dare. End of section 4. Section 5 of the Vision of Sir Launfal and Other Poems by James Russell Lowell. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Recording by Phil Schempf. On Board the 76. Written for Mr. Bryant's 70th birthday, November 3rd, 1864. After the disastrous Battle of Bull Run, Congress authorized the creation of an army of 500,000 and the expenditure of $500 million. The affair of the Trent had partially indicated the temper of the English government, and the people of the United States were thoroughly roused to a sense of the great task which lay before them. Mr. Bryant at this time not only gave strong support to the Union through his paper, The Evening Post of New York, but wrote 2 lyrics which had a profound effect. One of these, entitled Not Yet, was addressed to those of the Old World who were secretly or openly desiring the downfall of the Republic. The other, Our Country's Call, was a thrilling appeal for recruits. It is to this time and these 2 poems that Mr. Lowell refers in the lines that follow. Our ship lay tumbling in an angry sea, her rudder gone, her mainmast o'er the side. Her scuppers, from the waves' clutch staggering free, trailed threads of priceless crimson through the tide. Sails, shrouds, and spars, with pirate cannon torn, we lay awaiting morn. Awaiting morn, such morn as mocks despair, and she that bare the promise of the world within her sides, now hopeless, helmless, bare. At random o'er the wildering waters hurled, the reek of battle drifting slow alee, not sullener than we. Morn came at last to peer into our woe, when lo, a sail, now surely help was nigh. The red cross flames aloft, Christ's pledge, but no, her black guns grinning hate, she rushes by, and hails us. Gains the leak? Aye, so we thought. Sink then with curses fraught. I leaned against my gun, still angry hot, and my lids tingled with the tears held back. This scorn, methought, was crueler than shot, the manly death grip in the battle rack. Yard arm to yard arm were more friendly far than such fear-smothered war. There our foe wallowed, like a wounded brute, the fiercer for his hurt. What now were best? One more tug bravely at the peril's root, though death came with it? Or evade the test, if right or wrong in this God's world of ours be leagued with higher powers? Some, faintly loyal, felt their pulses lag with the slow beat that doubts and then despairs. Some, caitiff, would have struck the starry flag that knits us with our past, and makes us heirs of deeds high-hearted as were ever done 'neath the all-seeing sun. But there was one, the singer of our crew, upon whose head age waved his peaceful sign, but whose red heart's blood no surrender knew. And couchant under brows of massive line, the eyes, like guns beneath a parapet, watched, charged with lightnings yet. The voices of the hills did his obey. The torrents flashed and tumbled in his song. He brought out our native fields from far away, or set us mid the innumerable throng of dateless woods, or where we heard the calm old homestead's evening psalm. But now he sang of faith to things unseen, of freedom's birthright given to us in trust, and words of doughty cheer he spoke between that made all earthly fortune seem as dust, matched with that duty, old as time and new, of being brave and true. We, listening, learned what makes the might of words, manhood to back them, constant as a star, His voice rammed home our cannon, edged our swords, and sent our boarders shouting. Shroud and spar heard him and stiffened. The sails heard and wooed the winds with loftier mood. In our dark hours he manned our guns again, remanned ourselves from his own manhood's stores. Pride, honor, country throbbed through all his strain. And shall we praise? God's praise was his before, and on our futile laurels he looks down, himself our bravest crown. End of section 5. Section 6 of the Vision of Sir Launfal and Other Poems by James Russell Lowell. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Recording by Phil Schempf. An Indian-Summer Reverie. When Mr. Lowell wrote this poem, he was living at Elmwood in Cambridge, at that time quite remote from town influences, Cambridge itself being scarcely more than a village, but now rapidly losing its rustic surroundings. The Charles River flowed nearby, then a limpid stream, untroubled by factories or sewage. It is a tidal river, and not far from Elmwood winds through broad salt marshes. Mr. Longfellow's old home is a short stroll nearer town, and the two poets exchanged pleasant shots, as may be seen by Lowell's To H.W.L. and Longfellow's The Herons of Elmwood. In Under the Willows, Mr. Lowell has, as it were, indulged in another reverie at a later period of his life, among the same familiar surroundings. What visionary tints the year puts on, when falling leaves falter through motionless air, or numbly cling and shiver to be gone. How shimmer the low flats and pastures bare, as with her nectar Hebe autumn fills the bowl between me and those distant hills, and smiles and shakes abroad her misty tremulous hair. No more the landscape holds its wealth apart, making me poorer in my poverty, but mingles with my senses and my heart. My own projected spirit seems to me in her own reverie the world to steep. 'Tis she that waves to sympathetic sleep, moving as she is moved, each field and hill and tree. How fuse and mix, with what unfelt degrees, clasped by the faint horizon's languid arms, each into each, the hazy distances. The softened season all the landscape charms. Those hills, my native village that embay, in waves of dreamier purple roll away, and floating in mirage seem all the glimmering farms. Far distant sounds the hidden chickadee close at my side. Far distant sound the leaves. The fields seem fields of dream, where memory wanders like gleaning Ruth, and as the sheaves of wheat and barley waver in the eye of Boaz as the maiden's glow went by, so tremble and seem remote all things the sense receives. The cock's shrill trump that tells of scattered corn, passed breezily on by all his flapping mates, faint and more faint, from barn to barn is borne, southward, perhaps to far Magellan Straits. Dimly I catch the throb of distant flails. Silently overhead the hen-hawk sails, with watchful, measuring eye, and for his quarry waits. The sobered robin, hunger silent now, seeks cedar berries blue, his autumn cheer. The squirrel on the shingly shagbark's bough now saws, now lists with downward eye and ear, then drops his nut, and with a chipping bound whisks to his winding fastness underground. The clouds like swans drift down the streaming atmosphere. O'er yon bare knoll the pointed cedar shadows drowse on the crisp gray moss. The ploughman's call creeps faint as smoke from black, fresh-furrowed meadows. The single crow a single caw lets fall, and all around me every bush and tree says autumn's here, and winter soon will be, who snows his soft white sleep and silence over all. The birch, most shy and ladylike of trees, her poverty as best she may retrieves, and hints at her foregone gentilities with some saved relics of her wreath of leaves. The swamp oak, with his royal purple on, glares red as blood across the sinking sun, as one who proudlier to a failing fortune cleaves. He looks a sachem in his red blanket wrapped, who, mid some council of the sad-garbed whites, erect and stern in his own memories lapped, with distant eye broods over other sights, sees the hushed wood the city's flare replace, the wounded turf heal o'er the railway's trace, and roams the savage past of his undwindled rights. The red oak, softer grained, yields all for lost, and with his crumpled foliage stiff and dry, after the first betrayal of the frost, rebuffs the kiss of the relenting sky. The chestnuts, lavish of their long-hid gold to the faint summer, beggared now and old, pour back the sunshine hoarded 'neath her favoring eye. The ash her purple drops forgivingly, and sadly breaking not the general hush. The maple swamps glow like a sunset sea, each leaf a ripple with its separate flush. All round the wood's edge creeps the skirting blaze of bushes low, as when on cloudy days, ere the rain falls, the cautious farmer burns his brush. Or yon low wall which guards one unkempt zone, where vines and weeds and scrub oaks intertwine, safe from the plough, whose rough discordant stone is massed to one soft gray by lichens fine. The tangled blackberry, crossed and recrossed, weaves a prickly network of ensanguined leaves. Hard by with coral beads the prim black alders shine. Pillaring with flame this crumbling boundary, whose loose blocks topple 'neath the ploughboy's foot, who with each sense shut fast except the eye, creeps close and scares the jay he hoped to shoot. The woodbine up the elm's straight stem aspires, coiling it, harmless with autumnal fires. In the ivy's paler blaze the martyr oak stands mute. Below, the Charles, a stripe of nether sky, now hid by rounded apple trees between, whose gaps the misplaced sail sweeps bellying by, now flickering golden through a woodland screen, then spreading out at his next turn beyond, a silver circle like an inland pond, slips seaward silently through the marshes purple and green. Dear marshes, vain to him the gift of sight who cannot in their various incomes share, from every season drawn, of shade and light, who sees in them but levels of brown and bare. Each change of storm or sunshine scatters free on them its largesse of variety, for nature with cheap means still works her wonders rare. In spring they lie one broad expanse of green, o'er which the light winds run with glimmering feet. Here yellower stripes track out the creek unseen, there darker growths o'er hidden ditches meet. The purpler stains show where the blossoms crowd, as if the silent shadow of a cloud hung there becalmed, with the next breath to fleet. All round, upon the river's slippery edge, witching to deeper calm the drowsy tide, whispers and leans the breeze entangling sedge. Through emerald glooms the lingering waters slide, or sometimes wavering throw back the sun, and the stiff banks in eddies melt and run of dimpling light, and with the current seem to glide. In summer 'tis a blithesome sight to see, as step by step with measured swing they pass, the wide-ranked mowers wading to the knee, their sharp scythes panting through the thick-set grass. Then, stretched beneath a rick's shade in a ring, their nooning take, while one begins to sing a stave that droops and dies 'neath the close sky of brass. Meanwhile that devil-may-care, the bobolink, remembering duty, in mid-quaver stops, just ere he sweeps o'er rapture's tremulous brink, and 'twixt the winrows most demurely drops, a decorous bird of business, who provides for his brown mate and fledglings 6 besides, and looks from right to left, a farmer mid his crops. Another change subdues them in the fall, but saddens not. They still show merrier tints, though sober russet seems to cover all. when the first sunshine through their dewdrop glints. Look how the yellow clearness, streamed across, redeems with rarer hues the season's loss, as dawn's feet there had touched and left their rosy prints. Or come when sunset gives its freshened zest, lean o'er the bridge and let the ruddy thrill, while the shorn sun swells down the hazy west, glow opposite. The marshes drink their fill and swoon with purple veins, then slowly fade through pink to brown, as eastward moves the shade, lengthening with stealthy creep of Simon's darkening hill. Later, and yet ere winter wholly shuts, ere through the first dry snow the runner grates, and the loath cart-wheel screams in slippery ruts, while firmer ice the eager boy awaits, trying each buckle and strap beside the fire, and until bedtime plays with his desire, 20 times putting on and off his new-bought skates. Then every morn the river's banks shine bright, with smooth plate armor, treacherous and frail, by the frost's clinking hammers forged at night, 'gainst which the lances of the sun prevail, giving a pretty emblem of the day when guiltier arms in light shall melt away, and states shall move free-limbed, loosed from war's cramping mail. And now those waterfalls the ebbing river twice every day creates on either side tinkle as through their fresh-sparred grots they shiver in grass-arched channels to the sun denied. High flaps in sparkling blue the far-heard crow, the silvered flats gleam frostily below. Suddenly drops the gull and breaks the glassy tide. But crowned in turn by vying seasons 3, their winter halo hath a fuller ring. This glory seems to rest immovably. The others were too fleet in vanishing, when the hid tide is at its highest flow, o'er marsh and stream, one breathless trance of snow, with brooding fullness awes and hushes everything. The sunshine seems blown off by the bleak wind, as pale as formal candles lit by day. Gropes to the sea the river dumb and blind. The brown ricks, snow-thatched by the storm in play, show pearly breakers combing o'er their lee, white crests as of some just enchanted sea, checked in their maddest leap and hanging poised midway. But when the eastern blow, with rain aslant, from mid-sea's prairies green and rolling plains, drives in his wallowing herds of billows gaunt, and the roused Charles remembers in his veins old ocean's blood, and snaps his gyves of frost, that tyrannous silence on the shores is tossed in dreary wreck, and crumbling desolation reigns. Edgewise or flat, in druid-like device, with leaden pools between or gullies bare, the blocks lie strewn, a bleak Stonehenge of ice, no life, no sound to break the grim despair, save sullen plunge, as through the sedges stiff down crackles riverward some thaw-sapped cliff, or when the close-wedged fields of ice crunch here and there. But let me turn from fancy-pictured scenes to that whose pastoral calm before me lies. Here nothing harsh or rugged intervenes. The early evening with her misty dyes smooths off the ravelled edges of the nigh, relieves the distant with her cooler sky, and tones the landscape down and soothes the wearied eyes. There gleams my native village, dear to me, though higher changes waves each day are seen. Whelming fields famed in boyhood's history, sanding with houses the diminished green. There, in red brick, which softening time defies, stand square and stiff the Muses' factories. How with my life knit up is every well-known scene. Flow on, dear river, not alone you flow to outward sight, and through your marshes wind. Fed from the mystic springs of long ago, your twin flows silent through my world of mind. Grow dim, dear marshes, in the evening's gray. Before my inner sight ye stretch away, and will forever, though these fleshly eyes grow blind. Beyond the hillocks' house-bespotted swell, where Gothic chapels house the horse and chaise, where quiet kits in Grecian temples dwell, where Coptic tombs resound with prayer and praise, where dust and mud the equal year divide, there gentle Alston lived and wrought and died, transfiguring street and shop with his illumined gaze. Virgilium vidi tantum I have seen, but as a boy who looks alike on all, that misty hair, that fine Undine-like mien, tremulous as down to feeling's faintest call. Ah, dear old homestead, count it to thy fame that thither many times the painter came. One elm yet bears his name, a feathery tree and tall. Swiftly the present fades in memory's glow. Our only sure possession is the past. The village blacksmith died a month ago, and dim to me the forge's roaring blast. Soon fire new medievals we shall see, oust the black smithy from its chestnut tree, and that hewn down, perhaps the beehive green and vast. How many times, prouder than king on throne, loosed from the village school dames, A's and B's, panting have I the creaky bellows blown, and watched the pent volcano's red increase. Then paused to see the ponderous sledge brought down by that hard arm voluminous and brown. From the white iron swarm its golden vanishing bees. Dear native town, whose choking elms each year with eddying dust before their time turn gray, pining for rain, to me the dust is dear. It glorifies the eve of summer day, and when the westering sun half sunken burns, the moat thick air to deepest orange turns. The westward horseman rides through clouds of gold away. So palpable I've seen those unshorn few, the 6 old willows at the cause's end. Such trees Paul Potter never dreamed nor drew. Through this dry mist their checkering shadows send, striped here and there with many a long-drawn thread, where stream through leafy chinks the trembling red, past which in one bright trail the hang-bird's flashes blend. Yes, dearer for thy dust than all that ere beneath the awarded crown of victory gilded the blown Olympic charioteer. Though lightly prized the ribbon parchments 3, yet collegisse juvat, I am glad that here what colleging was mine I had. It linked another tie, dear native town, with thee. Nearer art thou than simply native earth. My dust with thine concedes a deeper tie. A closer claim thy soil may well put forth, something of kindred more than sympathy. For in thy bounds I reverently laid away that blinding anguish of forsaken clay, that title I seem to have in earth and sea and sky. That portion of my life more choice to me, though brief, yet in itself so round and whole than all the imperfect residues can be. The artist saw his statue of the soul was perfect, so with one regretful stroke the earthen model into fragments broke, and without her the impoverished seasons roll. End of section 6. Section 7 of the Vision of Sir Launfal and Other Poems by James Russell Lowell. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Recording by Phil Schempf. The First Snowfall. The snow had begun in the gloaming, and busily all the night had been heaping field and highway with a silence deep and white. Every pine and fir and hemlock wore ermine too dear for an earl, and the poorest twig on the elm tree was ridged inch deep with pearl. From sheds new roofed with Carrara came Chanticleer's muffled crow. The stiff rails were softened to swan's down and still fluttered down the snow. I stood and watched by the window the noiseless work of the sky, and the sudden flurries of snowbirds like brown leaves whirling by. I thought of a mound in sweet Auburn where a little headstone stood, how the flakes were folding it gently, as did robins the babes in the wood. Up spoke our own little Mabel, saying, "Father, who makes it snow?" And I told her of the good All-Father who cares for us here below. Again I looked at the snowfall, and thought of the leaden sky that arched o'er our first great sorrow, when that mound was heaped so high. I remembered the gradual patience that fell from that cloud like snow, flake by flake, healing and hiding the scar of our deep-plunged woe. And again to the child I whispered, "The snow that husheth all, darling, the merciful Father alone can make it fall." Then with eyes that saw not I kissed her, and she, kissing back, could not know that my kiss was given to her sister, folded close under the deepening snow. End of section 7. Section 8 of the Vision of Sir Launfal and Other Poems by James Russell Lowell. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Recording by Phil Schempf. The Oak. What gnarled stretch, what depth of shade is his! There needs no crown to mark the forest's king. How in his leaves outshines full summer's bliss! Sun, storm, rain, dew, to him their tribute bring, which he with such benignant royalty accepts as overpayeth what is lent. All nature seems his vassal proud to be, and cunning only for his ornament. How towers he too amid the billowing snows, an unquelled exile from the summer's throne, whose plain, uncinctured front more kingly shows, now that the obscuring courtier leaves are flown. His boughs make music of the winter air, jeweled with sleet like some cathedral front, where clinging snowflakes with quaint art repair the dints and furrows of time's envious brunt. How doth his patient strength the rude March wind persuade to seem glad breaths of summer breeze, and win the soil that would fain be unkind, to swell his revenues with proud increase. He is the gem, and all the landscape wide, so doth his grandeur isolate the sense, seems but the setting, worthless all beside, an empty socket were he fallen thence. So, from oft converse with life's wintry gales, should man learn how to clasp with tougher roots the inspiring earth, how otherwise avails the leaf-creating sap that sunward shoots. So every year that falls with noiseless flake should fill old scars up on the stormward side, and make hoar age revered for age's sake, not for traditions of youth's leafy pride. So from the pinched soil of a churlish fate, true hearts compel the sap of sturdier growth. So between earth and heaven stand simply great, that these shall seem but their attendants both. For nature's forces with obedient zeal wait on the rooted faith and oaken will. As quickly the pretender's cheat they feel, and turn mad pucks to flout and mock him still. Lord, all thy works are lessons. Each contains some emblem of man's all-containing soul. Shall he make fruitless all thy glorious pains, delving within thy grace an eyeless mole? Make me the least of thy Dodona grove. Cause me some message of thy truth to bring. Speak but a word to me, nor let thy love among my boughs disdain to perch and sing. End of section 8. Section 9 of the Vision of Sir Launfal and Other Poems by James Russell Lowell. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Recording by Phil Schempf. Prometheus. The classic legend of Prometheus underwent various changes in successive periods of Greek thought. In its main outline, the story is the same, that Prometheus, whose name signifies forethought, stole fire from Zeus or Jupiter or Jove, and gave it as a gift to man. For this, the angry god bound him upon Mount Caucasus, and decreed that a vulture should prey upon his liver, destroying every day what was renewed in the night. The struggle of man's thought to free itself from the tyranny of fear and superstition and all monsters of the imagination is illustrated in the myth. The myth is one which has been a favorite with modern poets, as witness Goethe, Shelley, Mrs. Browning, and Longfellow. One after one the stars have risen and set, sparkling upon the hoar-frost on my chain. The bear, that prowled all night about the fold of the North Star, has shrunk into his den, scared by the blithesome footsteps of the dawn, whose blushing smile floods all the Orient. And now bright Lucifer grows less and less into the heaven's blue quiet deep withdrawn. Sunless and starless all, the desert sky arches above me, empty as this heart for ages hath been empty of all joy, except to brood upon its silent hope, as o'er its hope of day the sky doth now. All night have I heard voices, deeper yet the deep low breathing of the silence grew, while all about, muffled in awe, there stood shadows, or forms, or both, clear felt at heart, but when I turned to front them, far along only a shudder through the midnight ran, and the dense stillness walled me closer round. But still I heard them wander up and down that solitude, and flappings of dusk wings did mingle with them, whether of those hags let slip upon me once from Hades' deep, or of yet dire torments, if such be, I could but guess. And then toward me came a shape as of a woman, very pale it was and calm. Its cold eyes did not move, and mine moved not, but only stared on them. Their fixed awe went through my brain like ice. A skeleton hand seemed clutching at my heart, and a sharp chill, as if a dank night fog suddenly closed me in, was all I felt. And then, methought, I heard a freezing sigh, a long deep shivering sigh, as from blue lips stiffening in death, close to mine ear. I thought some doom was close upon me, and I looked and saw the red moon through the heavy mist, just setting, and it seemed as it were falling or reeling to its fall, so dim and dead and palsy-struck it looked. Then all sounds merged into the rising surges of the pines, which leagues below me, clothing the gaunt loins of ancient Caucasus with hairy strength, sent up a murmur in the morning wind, sad as the wail that from the populous earth all day and night to high Olympus soars, fit incense to thy wicked throne, O Jove. Thy hated name is tossed once more in scorn from off my lips, for I will tell thy doom. And are these tears? Nay, do not triumph, Jove. They are wrung from me but by the agonies of prophecy, like those sparse drops which fall from clouds in travail of the lightning, when the great wave of the storm, high-curled and black, rolls steadily onward to its thunderous break. Why art thou made a god of, thou poor type of anger and revenge and cunning force? True power was never born of brutish strength, nor sweet truth suckled at the shaggy dugs of that old she-wolf. Are thy thunderbolts, that quell the darkness for a space, so strong as the prevailing patience of meek light, who with the invincible tenderness of peace wins it to be a portion of herself? Why art thou made a god of, thou who hast the never-sleeping terror at thy heart, that birthright of all tyrants, worse to bear than this thy ravening bird on which I smile? Thou swearest to free me if I will unfold what kind of doom it is whose omen flits across thy heart, as o'er a troop of doves the fearful shadow of the kite. What need to know that truth whose knowledge cannot save? Evil its errand hath, as well as good. When thine is finished, thou art known no more. There is a higher purity than thou, and a higher purity is greater strength. Thy nature is thy doom, at which thy heart trembles behind the thick wall of thy might. Let man but hope, and thou art straightway chilled with thought of that drear silence and deep night, which like a dream shall swallow thee and thine. Let man but will, and thou art God no more, more capable of ruin than the gold and ivory that image thee on earth. He who hurled down the monstrous Titan brood, blinded with lightnings, with rough thunders stunned, is weaker than a simple human thought. My slender voice can shake thee, as the breeze that seems but apt to stir a maiden's hair, sways huge Oceanus from pole to pole. For I am still Prometheus, and foreknow in my wise heart the end and doom of all. Yes, I am still Prometheus, wiser grown by years of solitude, that holds apart the past and future, giving the soul room to search into itself, and long commune with this eternal silence. More a god, in my long suffering and strength to meet with equal front the direst shafts of fate, than thou in thy faint-hearted despotism, girt with thy baby toys of force and wrath. Yes, I am that Prometheus who brought down the light to man, which thou, in selfish fear, hadst to thyself usurped. His by sole right, for man hath right to all save tyranny, and which shall free him yet from thy frail throne. Tyrants are but the spawn of ignorance, begotten by the slaves they trample on, who, could they win a glimmer of the light, and see that tyranny is always weakness, or fear with its own bosom ill at ease, would laugh away in scorn the sand-wove chain which their own blindness feigned for adamant. Wrong ever builds on quicksands, but the right to the firm centre lays its moveless base. The tyrant trembles if the air but stirs the innocent ringlets of a child's free hair, and crouches when the thought of some great spirit with world-wide murmur, like a rising gale over men's hearts as over standing corn, rushes and bends them to its own strong will. So shall some thought of mine yet circle earth, and puff away thy crumbling altars, Jove. And wouldst thou know of my supreme revenge, poor tyrant, even now dethroned in heart, realmless in soul as tyrants ever are? Listen, and tell me if this bitter peak, this never-glutted vulture, and these chains shrink not before it, for it shall befit a sorrow-taught, unconquered Titan heart. Men, when their death is on them, seem to stand on a precipitous crag that overhangs the abyss of doom, and in that depth to see, as in a glass, the features, dim and vast, of things to come, the shadows, as it seems, of what had been. Death ever fronts the wise, not fearfully, but with clear promises of larger life, on whose broad vans upborne their outlook widens, and they see beyond the horizon of the present and the past, even to the very source and end of things. Such am I now. Immortal woe hath made my heart a seer, and my soul a judge between the substance and the shadow of truth. The sure supremeness of the beautiful, by all the martyrdoms made doubly sure of such as I am. This is my revenge, which of my wrongs builds a triumphal arch, through which I see a sceptre and a throne, the pipings of glad shepherds on the hills, tending the flocks no more to bleed for thee, the songs of maidens pressing with white feet the vintage on thy altars poured no more, the murmurous bliss of lovers underneath dim grapevine bowers whose rosy bunches press not half so closely their warm cheeks, unpaled by thoughts of thy brute lust, the hive-like hum of peaceful commonwealths, where sunburnt toil reaps for itself the rich earth made its own by its own labor, lightened with glad hymns to an omnipotence which thy mad bolts would cope with as a spark with the vast sea. Even the spirit of free love and peace, duty's sure recompense through life and death, these are such harvests as all master spirits reap, haply not on earth, but reap no less because the sheaves are bound by hands not theirs. These are the bloodless daggers wherewithal they stab fallen tyrants, this their high revenge. For their best part of life on earth is when, long after death, prisoned and pent no more, their thoughts, their wild dreams even, have become part of the necessary air men breathe. When, like the moon, herself behind a cloud, they shed down light before us on life's sea, that cheers us to steer onward, still in hope. Earth with her twining memories ivies o'er their holy sepulchres. The chainless sea, in tempest or wide calm, repeats their thoughts. The lightning and the thunder, all free things, have legends of them for the ears of men. All other glories are as falling stars, but universal nature watches theirs. Such strength is won by love of humankind. Not that I feel that hunger after fame, which souls of a half-greatness are beset with, but that the memory of noble deeds cries shame upon the idle and the vile, and keeps the heart of man forever up to the heroic level of old time. To be forgot at first is little pain to a heart conscious of such high intent as must be deathless on the lips of men. But having been a name, to sink and be a something which the world can do without, which, having been or not, would never change the lightest pulse of fate. This is indeed a cup of bitterness, the worst to taste, and this thy heart shall empty to the dregs. Endless despair shall be thy Caucasus, and memory thy vulture. Thou wilt find oblivion far lonelier than this peak. Behold thy destiny. Thou think'st it much that I should brave thee, miserable god, but I have braved a mightier than thou. Even the tempting of this soaring heart, which might have made me scarcely less than thou a god among my brethren weak and blind. Scarce less than thou, a pitiable thing, to be downtrodden into darkness soon. But now I am above thee, for thou art the bungling workmanship of fear, the block that awes the swart barbarian. But I am what myself have made, a nature wise with finding in itself the types of all, with watching from the dim verge of the time what things are to be visible in the gleams, thrown forward on them from the luminous past. Wise with the history of its own frail heart, with reverence and with sorrow, and with love, broad as the world, for freedom and for man. Thou in all thy strength shall crumble, except love, by whom and for whose glory ye shall cease. And when thou art but a dim moaning, heard from out the pitiless gloom of chaos, I shall be a power and a memory, a name to fright all tyrants with, a light unsettling as the pole star, a great voice heard in the breathless pause of the fight by truth and freedom ever waged with wrong, clear as a silver trumpet to awake huge echoes that from age to age live on in kindred spirits, giving them a sense of boundless power from boundless suffering wrung. And many a glazing eye shall smile to see the memory of my triumph, for to meet wrong with endurance and to overcome the present with a heart that looks beyond are triumph. Like a prophet eagle, perch upon the sacred banner of the right. Evil springs up and flowers and bears no seed, and feeds the green earth with its swift decay, leaving it richer for the growth of truth. But good, once put in action or in thought, like a strong oak, doth from its boughs shed down the ripe germs of a forest. Thou, weak god, shall fade and be forgotten, but this soul, fresh living still in the serene abyss, in every heaving shall partake, that grows from heart to heart among the sons of men. As the ominous hum before the earthquake runs, far through the Aegean from roused isle to isle, foreboding wreck to palaces and shrines, and mighty rents in many a cavernous air that darkens the free light to man. This heart, unscarred by thy grim vulture, as the truth grows but more lovely 'neath the beaks and claws of harpies blind that fain would soil it, shall in all the throbbing exaltation share that wait on freedom's triumphs, and in all the glorious agonies of martyr spirits. Sharp lightning throws to split the jagged clouds that veil the future, showing them the end. Pain's thorny crown for constancy and truth, girding the temples like a wreath of stars. This is a thought that, like the fabled laurel, makes my faith thunderproof, and thy dread bolts fall on me like the silent flakes of snow on the hoar brows of aged Caucasus. But, O thought far more blissful, they can rend this cloud of flesh and make my soul a star. Unleash thy crouching thunders now, O Jove. Free this high heart, which, a poor captive long, doth knock to be let forth. This heart which still, in its invincible manhood, overtops thy puny godship, as this mountain doth the pines that moss its roots. Oh, even now, while from my peak of suffering I look down, beholding with a far-spread gush of hope the sunrise of that beauty, in whose face, shone all around with love, no man shall look, but straightway, like a god he is uplift unto the throne long empty for his sake, and clearly oft foreshadowed in wide dreams by his free inward nature, which nor thou nor any anarch after thee can bind from working its great doom. Now set free this essence, not to die, but to become part of that awful presence which doth haunt the palaces of tyrants, to hunt off, with its grim eyes and fearful whisperings and hideous sense of utter loneliness, all hope of safety, all desire of peace, all but the loathed forefeeling of blank death, part of that spirit which doth ever brood in patient calm on the unpilfered nest of man's deep heart, till mighty thoughts grow fledged to sail with darkening shadow o'er the world, filling with dread such souls as dare not trust in the unfailing energy of good, until they swoop and their pale quarry make of some o'er-bloated wrong, that spirit which scatters great hopes in the seed field of man, like acorns among grain, to grow and be a roof for freedom in all coming time. But no, this cannot be. For ages yet in solitude unbroken shall I hear the angry Caspian to the Euxine shout, and Euxine answer with a muffled roar, on either side storming the great walls of Caucasus with leagues of climbing foam, less from my height than flakes of downy snow, that draw back baffled but to hurl again, snatched up in wrath and horrible turmoil, mountain on mountain, as the Titans erst, my brethren, scaling the high seat of Jove, heaved Pelion upon Osa's shoulders broad in vain emprise. The moon will come and go with her monotonous vicissitude, once beautiful when I was free to walk among my fellows and to interchange the influence benign of loving eyes, but now by aged use grown wearisome. False thought, most false! For how could I endure these crawling creatures of lonely woe, unshamed by weak complaining, but for thee, loneliest, save me, of all created things? Mild-eyed Astarte, my best comforter, with thy pale smile of sad benignity. Year after year will pass away, and seem to me, in mine eternal agony, but as the shadows of dumb summer clouds, which I have watched so often darkening o'er the vast Sarmatian plain, league wide at first, but with still swiftness lessening on, till cloud and shadow meet and mingle where the gray horizon fades into the sky. Far, far to northward, yes, for ages yet must I lie here upon my altar huge, a sacrifice for man. Sorrow will be, as it hath been, his portion, endless doom, while the immortal with the mortal linked dreams of its wings and pines for what it dreams, with upward yearn unceasing. Better so, for wisdom is meek sorrow's patient child, and empire over self, and all the deep strong charities that make men seem like gods, and love that makes them be gods from her breast sucks in the milk that makes mankind one blood. Good never comes unmixed, or so it seems, having two faces, as some images are carved of foolish gods. One face is ill, but one heart lies beneath, and that is good, as are all hearts when we explore their depths. Therefore, great heart, bear up. Thou art but type of what all lofty spirits endure, that fain would win men back to strength and peace through love. Each hath his lonely peak, and on each heart envy or scorn or hatred tears lifelong with vulture beak, yet the high soul is left, and faith, which is but hope grown wise, and love and patience, which at last shall overcome. End of section 9. Section 10 of the Vision of Sir Launfal and Other Poems by James Russell Lowell. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Recording by Phil Schempf. To W. L. Garrison. Sometime afterward, it was reported to me by the city officers that they had ferreted out the paper and its editor, that his office was an obscure hole, his only visible auxiliary a Negro boy, and his supporters a very few insignificant persons of all colors. Letter of H. G. Otis. In a small chamber, friendless and unseen, toiled o'er his types one poor unlearned young man. The place was dark, unfurnitured, and mean, yet there the freedom of a race began. Help came but slowly. Surely no man yet put lever to the heavy world with less. What need of help? He knew how types were set. He had a dauntless spirit and a press. Such earnest natures are the fiery path, the compact nucleus, round which systems grow. Mass after mass becomes inspired therewith, and whirls impregnate with the central glow. O truth! O freedom! How are ye stillborn in the rude stable, in the manger nursed? What humble hands unbar those gates of morn, through which the splendors of the new day burst? What! Shall one monk, scarce known beyond his cell, front Rome's far-reaching bolts, and scorn her frown? Brave Luther answered yes. That thunder's swell rocked Europe and discharmed the Triple Crown. Whatever can be known of earth we know, sneered Europe's wise men, in their snail shells curled. No, said one man in Genoa, and that no out of the dark created this new world. Who is it will not dare himself to trust? Who is it hath not strength to stand alone? Who is it thwarts and bilks the inward must? He and his works, like sand, from earth are blown. Men of 1,000 shifts and wiles, look here. See one straightforward conscience put in pawn to win a world. See the obedient sphere by bravery's simple gravitation drawn. Shall we not heed the lesson taught of old, and by the present's lips repeated still, in our own single manhood to be bold, fortressed in conscience and impregnable will? We stride the river daily at its spring, nor in our childish thoughtlessness foresee what myriad vassal streams shall tribute bring, how like an equal it shall greet the sea. O small beginnings, ye are great and strong, based on a faithful heart and a weariless brain. Ye build the future fair, ye conquer wrong, ye earn the crown and wear it not in vain. End of section 10. Section 11 of the Vision of Sir Launfal and Other Poems by James Russell Lowell. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Recording by Phil Schempf. Wendell Phillips. He stood upon the world's broad threshold. Wide the din of battle and of slaughter rose. He saw God stand upon the weaker side, that sank in seeming loss before its foes. Many there were who made great haste, and sold unto the cunning enemy their swords. He scorned their gifts of fame and power and gold, and underneath their soft and flowery words heard the cold serpent hiss. Therefore he went, and humbly joined him to the weaker part. Fanatic named, and fool, yet well content so he could be the nearer to God's heart, and feel its solemn pulses, sending blood through all the widespread veins of endless good. End of section 11. Section 12 of the Vision of Sir Launfal and Other Poems by James Russell Lowell. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Recording by Phil Schempf. Mr. Hosea Biglow to the editor of the Atlantic Monthly. When the Mexican War was under discussion, Mr. Lowell began the publication in a Boston newspaper of satirical poems written in the Yankee dialect, and purporting to come for the most part from one Hosea Biglow. The poems were the sharpest political darts that were fired at the time, and when the verses were collected and set forth, with a paraphernalia of introductions and notes professedly prepared by an old-fashioned scholarly parson, Reverend Homer Wilbur, the book gave Mr. Lowell a distinct place as a wit and satirist, and was read with delight in England and America after the circumstance which called it out had become a matter of history and no longer of politics. When the War for the Union broke out, Mr. Lowell took up the same strain, and contributed to the Atlantic Monthly a second series of Biglow papers, and just before the close of the war published the poem that follows. Dear Sir, your letter come to hand requested me to please be funny, but I ain't made upon a plan that knows what's comin', gall or honey. There's times the world does look so queer, odd fancies come afore I call 'em, and then agin, for half a year, no preacher thought o' calls more solemn. You're in want o' somethin' light and cute, rattlin' and shrewd and kinno-jinglish, and wish pervidin' it'd suit, I'd take and citify my English. I can write long-tailed ef I please, but when I'm jokin', no, I thank ye. Then, 'fore I know it, my idees run helter-skelter into Yankee. Since I begun to scribble rhyme, I tell ye what, I hain't been foolin'. The parson's books, Life, Death, and Time, hev took some trouble with my schoolin'. Nor the airth don't git put out with me, that lovers though she was a woman. Why, there ain't a bird upon the tree but half forgives my bein' human. And yit I loved the high-schooled way, old farmer's head when I was younger. Their talk was meatier, and 'ud say, while book froth seems to whet your hunger, for puttin' in a downright lick twixt Humburg's eyes, there's few can match it. And then it helves my thoughts as slick as stret-grained hickory doos a hetchet. But when I can't, that's all, for nature won't put up with gullin'. Ideas you have to shove and haul like a druv peg ain't worth a mullin'. Live thoughts ain't sent for through all rifts o' sense they poured and resh ye onwards, like rivers when south lyin' drifts feel that old airth's a wheelin' sunwards. Time was the rhymes come crowdin' thick as office-seekers are ter 'lection, and into airy place 'd stick without no bother nor objection. But since the war my thoughts hang back, as though I wanted to enlist 'em, and substitoots they don't never lack, but then they slope afore you missed 'em. Nothin' don't seem like what it was. I can't see what there is to hinder, and yit my brains just go buzz-buzz like bumblebees agin a winder. For these times come, and all airth's row. There was one quiet place my head in where I could hide and think, but now it's all one teeter hoppin' dreadin'. Where's peace? I start some clear-blown night when gaunt stone walls grow numb and number, and creakin' cross the snow-crust white walk the cold starlight into summer. Up grows the moon, and swell by swell through the pale pastures silver's dimmer than the last smile that strives to tell o' love gone heavenward in its shimmer. I have been gladder o' such things than cocks o' spring or bees o' clover. They fill my heart with livin' springs, but now they seem to freeze 'em over. Sights innercent as babes on knee, peaceful as eyes o' pastured cattle, just 'cause they be so, seems to me, to rile me more with thoughts o' battle. Indoors and out, by spells I try, Ma'am Nature keeps her spin wheel goin', but leaves my nature stiff and dry as fields o' clover arter mowin', and her just keepin' on the same, calmer'n a clock and never carin', and findin' nary thing to blame it was as ef she tuck to swearin'. Snowflakes come whisperin' on the pane, the charm makes blazin' logs so pleasant, but I can't hark to what they're sayin' with Grant or Sherman allers present. The chimbleys shudder in the gale that lulls, then sudden takes to flappin' like a shot hawk, but all is stale to me as so much spirit rappin'. Under the yaller pines I house when sunshine makes 'em all sweet scented, and here among their furry boughs the baskin' west wind purr contented, while way o'erhead as sweet and low as distant bells that ring for meetin', the wedged wild geese their bugles blow, further and further south retreatin'. Or up the slippery knob I strain, and see 100 hills like islands lift their blue woods in broken chain out o' the sea o' snowy silence. The farm smokes, sweetest sight on airth, slow through the winter air shrinkin', seem kind o' sad, and round the hearth o' empty places set me thinkin'. Beaver roars hoarse with meltin' snows, and rattles diamonds from his granite,
Time was he snatched away my prose, and into psalms or satires ran it. But he, nor all the rest that once started my blood to country dances, can't set me goin' more'n a dunce that hain't no use for dreams and fancies. Rat-tat-tattle through the street I hear the drummers makin' riot, and I set thinkin' o' the feet that follered once and now are quiet. White feet as snowdrops innercent that never knowed the paths o' Satan, whose comin' step their ears that won't, no, not lifelong, leave off a-waitin'. Why, hain't I held 'em on my knee? Didn't I love to see 'em growin'? 3 likely lads as well could be, handsome and brave and not too knowin'. I set and looked into the blaze, whose nature, just like theirn, keeps climbin', as long as it lives in shinin' ways, and half despised myself for rhymin'. What's words to them whose faith and truth on war's red touchstone rang true metal, who ventured life and love and youth for the gret prize o' death and battle? To him who, deadly hurt again, flashed on afore the charge's thunder, tippin' wid fire the bolt of men that rive the rebel line asunder. 'Tain't right to have the young go fust, all throbbin' full o' gifts and graces, leavin' life's paupers dry as dust, to try and make b'lieve fill their places. Nothin' but tells us what we miss. There's gaps our lives can't never fay in, and that world seems so fur from this, left for us loafers to grow gray in. My eyes cloud up for rain, my mouth will take to twitchin' round the corners. I pity mothers, too, down south, for all they sought among the scorners. I'd sooner take my chance to stand at jedgment where your meanest slave is, that at God's bar hole up a hand as drippin' red as yourn, Jeff Davis. Come peace, not like a mourner bowed for honor lost and dear ones wasted, but proud to meet a people proud, with eyes that tell o' triumph tasted. Come with a hand grippin' on the hilt, and step that proves ye victory's daughter. Longin' for you our sperrits wilt, like shipwrecked men on rafts for water. Come while our country feels the lift of a gret instinct shoutin' forwards, and knows that freedom ain't a gift that tarries long in hands o' cowards. Come, sech as mothers prayed for, when they kissed their cross with lips that quivered, and bring fair wages for brave men. A nation saved, a race delivered. End section 12. Section 13 of the Vision of Sir Launfal and Other Poems by James Russell Lowell. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Recording by Phil Schempf. Via Franca. The battles of Magenta and Solferino in the early summer of 1859 had given promise of a complete emancipation of Italy from the Austrian supremacy, when Napoleon III, who was acting in alliance with Victor Emmanuel, King of Sardinia, held a meeting with the Emperor Franz Joseph of Austria at Via Franca, and agreed to terms which were very far from including the unification of Italy. There was a general distrust of Napoleon, and the war continued with the final result of a united Italy. In the poem which follows, Mr. Lowell gives expression to his want of faith in the French emperor. Wait a little. Do we not wait? Louis Napoleon is not fate. Francis Joseph is not time. There's one hath swifter feet than crime. Canon parliaments settle not. Venice is Austria's. Whose is thought? Mini is good, but spite of change, Gutenberg's gun has the longest range. Spin, spin, Clotho spin. Lachesis twist, and Atropos sever. In the shadow, year out, year in, the silent headsman waits forever. Wait, we say, our years are long. Men are weak, but man is strong. Since the stars first curved their rings, we have looked on many things. Great wars come and great wars go. Wolf tracks light on polar snow. We shall see him come and gone, this second-hand Napoleon. Spin, spin, Clotho spin. Lachesis twist, and Atropos sever. In the shadow, year out, year in, the silent headsman waits forever.
We saw the elder Corsican, and Clotho muttered as she span, while crowned lackeys bore the train of the pinchbeck Charlemagne. Sister, stint not length of thread. Sister, stay the scissors dread. On St. Helen's granite bleak, hark, the vulture whets his beak. Spin, spin, Clotho, spin. Lachesis twist, and Atropos sever. In the shadow, year out, year in, the silent headsman waits forever. The Bonapartes, we know their bees that wade in honey red to the knees. Their patient reaper its sheaves sleep sound in dreamless garners underground. We know false glory's spendthrift race, pawning nations for feathers and lace. It may be short, it may be long. 'Tis reckoning day, sneers unpaid wrong. Spin, spin, Clotho, spin. Lachesis twist, and Atropos sever. In the shadow, year out, year in, the silent headsman waits forever. The cock that wears the eagle's skin can promise what he ne'er could win. Slavery reaped for fine words sown, system for all and rights for none. Despots atop, a wild clan below, such is the Gaul from long ago. Wash the black from the Ethiop's face, wash the past out of man or race. Spin, spin, Clotho, spin. Lachesis twist, and Atropos sever. In the shadow, year out, year in, the silent headsman waits forever. 'Neath Gregory's throne a spider swings, and snares the people for the kings. Luther is dead, old quarrels pass. The stake's black scars are healed with grass. So dreamers prate. Did man e'er live, saw priest or woman yet forgive. But Luther's broom is left, and eyes peer o'er their creeds to where it lies. Spin, spin, Clotho, spin. Lachesis twist, and Atropos sever. In the shadow, year out, year in, the silent headsman waits forever. Smooth sails the ship of either realm, Kaiser and Jesuit at the helm. We look down the depths and mark silent workers in the dark, building slow the sharp-tusked reefs, old instincts hardening to new beliefs. Patience a little, learn to wait. Hours are long on the clock of fate. Spin, spin, Clotho, spin. Lachesis twist, and Atropos sever. Darkness is strong, and so is sin, but only God endures forever. End of section 13. Section 14 of the Vision of Sir Launfal and Other Poems by James Russell Lowell. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Recording by Phil Schempf. The Nightingale in the Study. Come forth, my catbird calls to me, and hear me sing a cavatina that, in this old familiar tree, shall hang a garden of Alcina. These buttercups shall brim with wine beyond all Lesbian juice or Massic. May not New England be divine, my ode to ripening summer classic? Or, if to me you will not hark, by Beaver Brook a thrush is ringing, till all the alder coverts dark seem sunshine dappled with his singing. Come out beneath the unmastered sky with its emancipating spaces, and learn to sing as well as I, without premeditated graces. What boot your many-volumed gains, those withered leaves forever turning, to win at best, for all your pains, a nature mummy-wrapped in learning? The leaves wherein true wisdom lies, on living trees the sun are drinking. Those white clouds, drowsing through the skies, grew not so beautiful by thinking. Come out with me, the oriole cries, escape the demon that pursues you, and hark the cuckoo weatherwise, still hiding farther onward woos you. Alas, dear friend, that all my days has poured from thy syringa thicket the quaintly discontinuous lays to which I hold a season ticket. A season ticket cheaply bought with a dessert of pilfered berries, and who so oft my soul has caught with morn and evening voluntaries. Deem me not faithless, if all day among my dusty books I linger, no pipe like thee for June to play with fancy-led, half-conscious finger.
A bird is singing in my brain and bubbling o'er with mingled fancies, gay, tragic, rapt, right heart of Spain fed with the sap of old romances. I ask no ampler skies than those his magic music rears above me, no falser friends, no truer foes, and does not Doña Clara love me? Cloaked shapes, a twanging of guitars, a rush of feet and rapiers clashing, then silence deep with breathless stars, and overhead a white hand flashing. O music of all moods and climes, vengeful, forgiving, sensuous, saintly, where still between the Christian chimes the Moorish cymbal tinkles faintly. O life borne lightly in the hand, for friend or foe with grace Castilian, O valley safe in fancy's land, not trampled to mud yet by the million. Bird of today, thy songs are stale, to his my singer of all weathers, my Calderon, my Nightingale, my Arab soul in Spanish feathers. Ah, friend, these singers dead so long, and still God knows in purgatory, give its best sweetness to all song, to nature's self her better glory. End of section 14. Section 15 of the Vision of Sir Launfal and Other Poems by James Russell Lowell. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Recording by Phil Schempf. Aladdin. When I was a beggarly boy and lived in a cellar damp, I had not a friend nor a toy, but I had Aladdin's lamp. When I could not sleep for cold, I had fire enough in my brain, and builded with roofs of gold my beautiful castles in Spain. Since then I have toiled day and night, I have money and power good store, but I'd give all my lamps of silver bright for the one that is mine no more. Take, fortune, whatever you choose, you gave and may snatch again. I have nothing 'twould pain me to lose, for I own no more castles in Spain. End of section 15. Section 16 of the Vision of Sir Launfal and Other Poems by James Russell Lowell. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Recording by Phil Schempf. Beaver Brook. Hushed with broad sunlight lies the hill, and minuting the long day's loss, the cedar's shadow, slow and still, creeps o'er its dial of grey moss. Warm noon brims the full valley's cup. The aspen's leaves are scarce astir. Only the little mill sends up its busy, never-ceasing burr. Climbing the loose-piled wall that hems the road along the mill pond's brink, from 'neath the arching barberry stems my footstep scares the shy chewink. Beneath a bony buttonwood the mill's red door lets forth the din. The whitened miller, dust-imbued, flits past the square of dark within. No mountain torrent's strength is here. Sweet beaver, child of forest still, heaps its small pitcher to the ear and gently waits the miller's will. Swift slips Undine along the race, unheard, and then, with flashing bound, floods the dull wheel with light and grace, and laughing hunts the loath drudge round. The miller dreams not at what cost the quivering millstones hum and whirl, nor how for every turn are tossed armfuls of diamond and of pearl. But summer cleared my happier eyes with drops of some celestial juice, to see how beauty underlies for evermore each form of use. And more, methought, I saw that flood which now so dull and darkling steals, thick here and there with human blood, to turn the world's laborious wheels. No more than doth the miller there, shut in our several cells, do we know with what waste of beauty rare moves every day's machinery. Surely the wiser time shall come when this fine overplus of might, no longer sullen, slow, and dumb, shall leap to music and to light. In that new childhood of the earth life of itself shall dance and play, fresh blood in time's shrunk veins make mirth, and labor meet delight halfway. End of section 16.
Section 17 of the Vision of Sir Launfal and Other Poems by James Russell Lowell. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Recording by Phil Schempf. The Shepherd of King Admetus. There came a youth upon the earth some 1,000 years ago, whose slender hands were nothing worth, whether to plough or reap or sow. Upon an empty tortoise-shell he stretched some chords, and drew music that made men's bosoms swell fearless, or brim their eyes with dew. Then King Admetus, one who had pure taste by right divine, decreed his singing not too bad to hear between cups of wine. And so, well pleased with being soothed into a sweet half-sleep, 3 times his kingly beard he smoothed, and made him viceroy o'er his sheep. His words were simple words enough, and yet he used them so, that what in other mouths was rough, in his seemed musical and low. Men called him but a shiftless youth, in whom no good they saw, and yet unwittingly in truth they made his careless words their law. They knew not how he learned it all, for idly, hour by hour, he sat and watched the dead leaves fall, or mused upon a common flower. It seemed the loveliness of things did teach him all their use, for in mere weeds and stones and springs he found a healing power profuse. Men granted that his speech was wise, but when a glance they caught of his slim grace and woman's eyes, they laughed and called him good for naught. Yet after he was dead and gone, and e'en his memory dim, earth seemed more sweet to live upon, more full of love because of him. And day by day more holy grew each spot where he had trod, till after poets only knew their first-born brother as a god. End of section 17. Section 18 of the Vision of Sir Launfal and Other Poems by James Russell Lowell. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Recording by Phil Schempf. The Present Crisis. In the year 1844, which is the date of the following poem, the question of annexation of Texas was pending, and it was made an issue of the presidential campaign then taking place. The anti-slavery party feared and opposed annexation, on account of the added strength which it would give to slavery, and the South desired it for the same reason. When a deed is done for freedom, through the broad earth's aching breast runs a thrill of joy prophetic, trembling on from east to west. And the slave, where'er he cowers, feels the soul within him climb to the awful verge of manhood, as the energy sublime of a century bursts full-blossomed on the thorny stem of time. Through the walls of hut and palace shoots the instantaneous throe, when the travail of the ages rings earth's systems to and fro. At the birth of each new era, with a recognizing start, nation wildly looks at nation, standing with mute lips apart, and glad truth's yet mightier man-child leaps beneath the future's heart. So the evil's triumph sendeth, with a terror and a chill, under continent to continent, the sense of coming ill. And the slave, where'er he cowers, feels his sympathies with God in hot teardrops ebbing earthward, to be drunk up by the sod, till a corpse crawls round unburied, delving in the nobler clod. For mankind are one in spirit, and an instinct bears along, round the earth's electric circle, the swift flash of right or wrong. Whether conscious or unconscious, yet humanity's vast frame, through its ocean's sundered fibers, feels the gush of joy or shame. In the gain or loss of one race all the rest have equal claim. Once to every man and nation comes the moment to decide, in the strife of truth with falsehood, for the good or evil side. Some great cause God's new Messiah, offering each the bloom or blight, parts the goats upon the left hand and the sheep upon the right, and the choice goes by forever twixt that darkness and that light. Hast thou chosen, O my people, on whose party thou shalt stand, ere the doom from its worn sandals shakes the dust against our land? Though the cause of evil prosper, yet 'tis truth alone is strong, and albeit she wander outcast now, I see around her throng troops of beautiful tall angels to enshield her from all wrong. Backward look across the ages, and the beacon moments see, that like peaks of some sunk continent jut through oblivion's sea. Not an ear in court or market for the low foreboding cry of those crises, God's stern winnowers, from whose feet earth's chaff must fly, never shows the choice momentous till the judgment have passed by. Careless seems the great avenger, history's pages but record one death grapple in the darkness, twixt old systems and the word. Truth forever on the scaffold, wrong forever on the throne. Yet that scaffold sways the future, and behind the dim unknown standeth God within the shadow, keeping watch above his own. We see dimly in the present what is small and what is great. Slow of faith, how weak an arm may turn the iron helm of fate. But the soul is still oracular, amid the market's din. Lists the ominous, stern whisper from the Delphic cave within. They enslave their children's children who make compromise with sin. Slavery, the earth-born Cyclops, fellest of the giant brood, sons of brutish force and darkness, who have drenched the earth with blood, famished in this self-made desert, blinded by our purer day, gropes in yet unblasted regions for his miserable prey. Shall we guide his gory fingers where our helpless children play? Then to side with truth is noble when we share her wretched crust, ere her cause bring fame and profit, and 'tis prosperous to be just. Then it is the brave man chooses, while the coward stands aside, doubting in his abject spirit till his Lord is crucified, and the multitude make virtue of the faith they had denied. Count me o'er earth's chosen heroes, they were souls that stood alone, while the men they agonized for hurled the contumelious stone, stood serene, and down the future saw the golden beam incline to the side of perfect justice, mastered by their faith divine, by one man's plain truth to manhood and to God's supreme design. By the light of burning heretics, Christ's bleeding feet I track, toiling up the new Calvaries, ever with the cross that turns not back. And these mounts of anguish number how each generation learned one new word of that grand credo which in prophet hearts hath burned. Since the first man stood God conquered with his face to heaven upturned. For humanity sweeps onward, where today the martyr stands. On the morrow crouches Judas with the silver in his hands. Far in front the cross stands ready, and the crackling faggots burn, while the hooting mob of yesterday in silent awe return, to glean up the scattered ashes into history's golden urn. 'Tis as easy to be heroes as to sit the idle slaves of a legendary virtue carved upon our fathers' graves. Worshippers of light ancestral make the present light a crime. Was the Mayflower launched by cowards, steered by men behind their time? Turn those tracks towards past or future that make Plymouth Rock sublime? They were men of present valor, stalwart old iconoclasts, unconvinced by axe or gibbet that all virtue was the past's. But we make their truth our falsehood, thinking that hath made us free, hoarding it in mouldy parchments while our tender spirits flee the rude grasp of that great impulse which drove them across the sea. They have rights who dare maintain them, we are traitors to our sires, smothering in their holy ashes freedom's new-lit altar fires. Shall we make their creed our jailer? Shall we, in our haste to slay, from the tombs of the old prophets, steal the funeral lamps away, to light up the martyrs' faggots round the prophets of today? New occasions teach new duties, time makes ancient good uncouth. They must upward still and onward who would keep abreast of truth. Lo, before us gleam her campfires, we ourselves must pilgrims be. Launch our Mayflower, and steer boldly through the desperate winter sea, nor attempt the future's portal with the past's blood-rusted key. End of section 18. Section 19 of the Vision of Sir Launfal and Other Poems by James Russell Lowell. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Recording by Phil Schempf. Al Fresco. The dandelions and buttercups gild all the lawn. The drowsy bee stumbles among the clover tops, and summer sweetens all but me. Away, unfruitful lore of books, for whose vain idiom we reject the soul's more native dialect. Aliens among the birds and brooks, dull to interpret or conceive what gospels lost the woods retrieve. Away, ye critics, city-bred, who springes set of thus and so, and in the first man's footsteps tread, like those who toil through drifted snow. Away, my poets, whose sweet spell can make a garden of a cell. I need ye not, for I today will make one long sweet verse of play. Snap chord of manhood's tenser strain, today I will be a boy again. The mind's pursuing element, like a bow slackened and unbent, in some dark corner shall be learnt. The robin sings as of old from the limb. The catbird croons in the lilac bush. Through the dim arbor, himself more dim, silently hops the hermit thrush. The withered leaves keep dumb for him. The irreverent buccaneering bee hath stormed and rifled the nunnery of the lily, and scattered the sacred floor with haste-dropped gold from shrine to door. There, as of yore, the rich milk-tinged buttercup its tiny polished urn holds up, filled with ripe summer to the edge, the sun and its own wine to pledge. And our tall elm, this 100th year doge of our leafy Venice here, who with an annual ring doth wed the blue Adriatic overhead, shadows with his palatial mass the deep canals of flowing grass. O unestranged birds and bees! O face of nature always true! O never unsympathizing trees! O never rejecting roof of blue, whose rash disharrison never falls on us unthinking prodigals! Yet who convict us all our ill so grand and unappeasable? Methinks my heart from each of these plucks part of childhood back again, long there imprisoned, as the breeze doth every hidden odor seize, of wood and water, hill and plain. Once more I am admitted peer in the upper house of nature here, and feel through all my pulses run the royal blood of breeze and sun. Upon these elm-arched solitudes no hum of neighbor toil intrudes. The only hammer that I hear is wielded by the woodpecker, the single noisy calling his in all our leaf-hid Sybaris. The good old time, close hidden here, persists, a loyal cavalier, while round heads prim with point of fox probe wainscot chink and empty box. Here no hoarse-voiced iconoclast insults thy statue's royal past. Myself too prone the axe to wield, I touch the silver side of the shield with lance reversed, and challenge peace, a willing convert of the trees. How chanced it that so long I tossed a cable's length from this rich coast, with foolish anchors hugging close the beckoning weeds and lazy ooze? Nor had the wit to wreck before on this enchanted island shore, whither the current of the sea with wiser drift persuaded me. Oh, might we but of such rare days build up the spirit's dwelling place! A temple of so Parian stone would brook a marble god alone, the statue of a perfect life, far shrined from earth's bestaining strife. Alas, though such felicity in our vexed world here may not be, yet, as sometimes the peasant's hut shows stones which old religion cut with text inspired, or mystic sign of the eternal and divine, torn from the consecration deep of some fallen nunnery's mossy sleep, so from the ruins of this day, crumbling in golden dust away, the soul one gracious block may draw, carved with some fragment of the law, which set in life's prosaic wall old benedictions may recall, and lure some nun-like thoughts to take their dwelling here for memory's sake. End of section 19. Section 20 of The Vision of Sir Launfal and Other Poems by James Russell Lowell. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Recording by Phil Schempf. The Footpath. It mounts athwart the windy hill, through sallow slopes of upland bare, and fancy climbs with footfall still its narrowing curves that end in air. By day a warmer-hearted blue stoops softly to that topmost swell, its thread-like windings seem a clue to gracious climes where all is well. By night, far yonder, I surmise an ampler world than clips my ken, where the great stars of happier skies commingle nobler fates of men. I look and long, then haste me home, still master of my secret rare. Once tried, the path would end in Rome, but now it leads me everywhere. Forever to the new it guides, from former good, old overmuch. What nature for her poets hides, 'tis wiser to divine than clutch. The bird I list hath never come within the scope of mortal ear. My prying step would make him dumb, and the fair tree his shelter sear. Behind the hill, behind the sky, behind my inmost thought, he sings. No feet avail to hear it nigh, the song itself must lend the wings. Sing on, sweet bird, close hid and raise those angel stairways in my brain, that climb from these low vaulted days to spacious sunshines far from pain. Sing when thou wilt, enchantment fleet, I leave thy covert haunt untrod, and envy science not her feat to make a twice-told tale of God. They said the fairies tripped no more, and long ago that Pan was dead. 'Twas but that fools preferred to bore earth's rind inch-deep for truth instead. Pan leaps and pipes all summer long, the fairies dance each full-mooned night. Would we but doff our lenses strong and trust our wiser eyes' delight. City of Elfland, just without our seeing, marvel ever new, glimpsed in fair weather, a sweet doubt, sketched in mirage-like on the blue. I build thee in yon sunset cloud, whose edge allures to climb the height. I hear thy drowned bells, inly loud, from still pools dusk with dreams of night. Thy gates are shut to hardiest will, thy countersign of long-lost speech. Those fountained courts, those chambers still, fronting time's far east, who shall reach? I know not, and will never pry, but trust our human heart for all. Wonders that from the seeker fly into an open sense may fall. Hide in thine own soul, and surprise the password of the unwary elves. Seek it, thou canst not bribe their spies, unsought, they whisper it themselves. End of section 20. End of The Vision of Sir Launfal and Other Poems by James Russell Lowell.